I have a message from out of the past. Helgi Swanson said, "How's Vince doing? He's doing such a great job."
Wow, that is a high compliment from Helgi.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow. That's great.
He told me all kinds of stories of when you were just a kid.
Wow, you would know.
Last summer.
That's right.
Speaking of stories.
It wasn't so long ago.
No, I told him that. I said he's still a kid at heart.
That's funny.
Yeah. He was calling to get He was calling to get ballot advice.
Well, Scott Ross is in here having flashbacks because he worked with Helgi out at the old growth management.
Yes,
he hired Scott Ross.
I got 9 o'clock.
He mentioned Scott and takes all the credit for Scott's great success, I think. So.
Oh boy.
Yeah, it was fun. Quite a chat.
I'll do 20. All right, should we get the show on the road? Yeah, I got a few minutes on 9.
Yep.
We good?
Yeah.
All right. Welcome to the July the 14th budget workshop. And I know the public is going to be watching. I assume we're live streaming this right on Facebook. I've got everybody except for Commissioner Jackson, who I think will join us hopefully at some point this morning. What I'd suggest is let's go ahead and let y'all, Vince will let y'all kick it off. And then before, sometimes we go around and just kind of take everybody's temperature at the beginning. I figure let's go through the presentations and then we'll do a quick round robin of where everybody is before we get into the meat of the discussion. But I'll hand it off to you, Vince. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And good morning, commissioners. In our new world of firsts, I'd like to welcome you all to your first virtual budget workshop. It will not be much different than our typical workshops in person, although I wager your choice of snacks and beverages may be a little better at home than here in the courthouse. Commissioners, to start, in recent years, this workshop normally occurs in the month of April. However, rescheduling for today allowed us additional time to analyze and project significant fiscal impacts related to COVID-19 on the county budget. And you'll hear a lot about that today. At this point in the process, commissioners, the board has already provided much guidance to us and specific direction in the development of the FY 2021 budget. In addition, at this point in the process, our budget is based on final values from the property appraiser, which are 6.8% over last year, final budget submissions from the constitutional officers, and my final recommendations to you on operating and capital budgets throughout the county. So today, we're seeking your direction on any other budget or fiscal policy issues that the board wishes to address in the fiscal year 21 budget. After my opening comments here, Commissioners, Alan will provide the budgetary details. Following our budget overview, there are several budget discussion items for your consideration. This will end with a workshop item and a presentation on the Leon County or the Leon CARES plan, which, as you know, Commissioners, from our briefings, is the expenditure and implementation plan on the reimbursement of up to $51.2 million of CARES Act funding designated for Leon County. We'll talk much more about that. As I said, first up this morning will be a discussion of the current and new year budget. But before we get into those details, Commissioners, I want to repeat what you've heard me say probably in every budget workshop over the past decade or so, which is that budgets are not done 1 year in isolation. As you all know, each year's impacts the next. And based on prior deliberate actions taken over numerous budget cycles, the county is in strong fiscal position to address the fiscal impacts of COVID-19. This strong foundation was built through budget discipline, sound fiscal planning, and an organization-wide focus on innovation, cost avoidance, and efficiency. from restoring our reserves to paying down long-term debt to constraining budgetary growth, Leon County is a fiscally sound organization today and a fiscally viable organization for the future. However, Commissioners, as you all know, the impacts of COVID-19 have had a dramatic fiscal impact on just about every organization, and the depth and duration of these impacts are largely unknown at this time. So I'd like to transition and take just a few moments to discuss broadly the economic impacts of the pandemic, followed by the major highlights in the budget. Commissioners, the global COVID-19 pandemic, as we stated in your budget materials, of course, is a human tragedy of historic proportion, which has had an unprecedented impact, resulting in a global recession. As a country, we now have reached levels of unemployment not experienced since the Great Depression of the 1930s. The federal chairman has stated this pandemic, and I will read the much shorter version of the quote that you have in your materials, but that it has caused a level of pain that is hard to capture in words, as lives are upended amid great uncertainty about the future. To support the economy, the Federal Reserve and the federal government have taken extraordinary efforts to ameliorate this sharp decline. They've reduced interest rates to near zero. They've launched emergency loan programs. They've provided direct stimulus to individuals. They've enhanced unemployment benefits. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, they have passed the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, or the CARES Act, to provide state and local governments funding for COVID-19 related expenses. Commissioners, while the CARES Act funding provides the opportunity for us here in the county to provide assistance to individuals and to businesses, it does not, as I've mentioned to each of you in our briefings, allow for replacing local government funding or funding for capital infrastructure. Commissioners, without federal funding to replace lost revenues, the impacts on the current and next year budget will be severe. Forecasted county revenues, including gas taxes, sales taxes, and tourism taxes, show Leon County losing a combined $17 million. That would be $6.9 million for the current year and $10.1 projected for next year. And while the economic disruption by the pandemic has been devastating on sales taxes, gas taxes, and tourism taxes, as we point out, property taxes have not been similarly impacted for the upcoming year. However, a cautionary note for next year, as property tax revenues are based on valuations from the previous year, it's unknown at this time what the property tax impacts from the pandemic might be in the following fiscal years. Commissioners, with that as a background, I'm going to now transition to the budgets themselves. Again, I use budgets plural, which we generally don't do this time of year. We're normally focusing on the development of the upcoming year budget. But as I mentioned, we've got the significant shortfall in the current year to address first. So starting with the current year, 2020, the revenue loss, as I mentioned, is significant, and we only have half a year left to offset a $6.9 million shortfall. So to start addressing the shortfall, Commissioners, you'll all recall that back in February, while the stay-at-home orders had not yet been issued, I notified the board that I initiated a hiring freeze, stopped all non-essential travel and training, and started implementing project deferrals, capital project deferrals, and operating expenditure reductions. Building on these actions, Commissioners, additional operating and capital project reductions are considered and before you to offset the revenue shortfall, including continuing the hiring freeze throughout the end of the year. Again, we're talking about the current year now. Continuing non-essential travel and training freeze, delaying certain one-time capital, deferring one-time planned computer upgrades, deferring parks and animal control vehicle replacements, eliminating planned renovations, and some others, but to just give you a flavor of that. And we'll come back and address this, of course, in more detail when I hand it over to Alan. Moving to the new fiscal year, Commissioners, the preliminary budget totals $281,722,696, which is a modest 2.7% increase over last year. And in summary, Commissioners, the budget is tentatively balanced with, and this is important, no increase in the millage rate for the 9th consecutive year. No increase in fire or solid waste assessment fees, no increase in taxes of fees or any kind. No new general revenue positions added, and importantly, in this high unemployment economy, no layoffs or furloughs to county employees. In addition, the budget contemplates significant cost savings and avoidances that are identified through our continuous organization-wide internal efforts. However, Commissioners, to offset the significant revenue shortfall, the budget considers balancing strategies, including operating budget reductions, including continuing the hiring freeze for 6 months, maintaining a flat capital budget year, which will save us over $2 million, realizing savings associated with paying down debt, a reduction in elections costs following a presidential election cycle, and an increased use of fund balance, Commissioners, from $1.5 million to $3 million, which still maintains our balances within policy limits. Commissioners, as I wrap up my opening comments, I want to emphasize that preparing these budget materials and the CARES Act item that will follow have been among some of the most, and I've mentioned this to you all, important and potentially complicated items that I've experienced. The amount of effort that's gone into these have been immense, even by our standards, Commissioners. But I hope you agree that what might have been highly complex and arduous issues here with the budget and with the CARES Act are presented in a clear and straightforward manner for your policy deliberations today. That was certainly our intent. Finally, Commissioners, before we transition into the remainder of today's agenda, I want to remind the board that today's workshop is scheduled from 9 until 3, and I'm not sure that we'll need all this time, but we do have several budget discussion items that I mentioned for your consideration. Based on your guidance today, Commissioners, we will prepare a budget ratification agenda item for tonight's meeting, and subsequent to your approval this evening, we will begin preparing a tentative budget for your September public hearings. Commissioners, we still have a placeholder for another budget workshop for August 25th. However, I anticipate that this additional workshop may not be needed, but it is still there should the board deem it necessary. And Commissioners, for the balance of your budget discussion items presented today are funded, or the balance of the budget discussion items today are funded as part of the recommended budget, so they're included. Commissioners, I, of course, want to take just a moment to thank all county staff, including Scott Ross and OMB, for their dedication, for their innovative efforts, and the ideas that are essential to maintaining a high-performing organization. I can't stress that enough. In the words of Commissioner Proctor, Commissioners, my final here, I want to recognize the constitutional officers for their spirit of cooperation in preparing for this budget today. Needless to say, they have a significant impact on the county budget, and we certainly appreciate and value the excellent working relationship that we have with them. Before I hand it off to Alan, Commissioners, let me just say, and Alan, of course, while I'm thanking people, obviously deserves tremendous credit for the expert fiscal stewardship he brings and the financial position of the county. I want to note that in this item, you'll see the county's strategic initiatives, targets, and bold goals. We bring this to you all twice a year. I provide the board with an update at the 5-year strategic planning session and today during your budget workshops, the first budget workshop. A more comprehensive report on the strategic plan will be provided at your January annual retreat. While we continue to focus on implementing the strategic plan, Commissioners, we have had several strategic initiatives, targets, and bold goals which have been adversely impacted by the pandemic, not surprisingly. However, we have completed 80% or about 70 of the 88 strategic initiatives, and your agenda materials contain all of the supporting details on this. I'd like to also thank Heather Peoples for a very big lift on this, and we put tremendous effort into tracking and evaluating the progress on all of these, as you know. And of course, we're happy to take any questions that you might have on those, Commissioners, but in the interest of time today, I'm now prepared to hand it off to Alan to provide a detailed budget overview for you. Thank you, Commissioners.
Thank you, Vince. Good morning, Commissioners. And I know as much as you'd want to see me for this presentation, you're going to get to see a PowerPoint instead. So with that, I'm going to start by sharing my screen for you. And what we have here, Commissioners, is just a broad overview. And then we're going to go to the, go back one. Oh, we're missing a slide. Okay, Commissioners, let me walk you through. So this is the overview. We're going to go through the 20 and 21 budget shortfalls as Vince outlined briefly in his speaking points for you this morning. Overall, as the Administrator said, we have about a $17 million shortfall projected over the 2 fiscal years. The majority of our revenues are down as a result of a decline in consumer spending, Commissioners. Those are sales taxes, people traveling less, which impact, of course, our tourist taxes. People are staying home from work and school, which does have an impact on our gas taxes. As you heard the Administrator say, from the federal chair on down to all the leading economists, we don't know how the uncertainty of this recession is going to play out. We've read numerous different scenarios. We've seen U-shaped recessions where the economy will go down, stay down for a little while, then pick back up. We've seen V forecasts where the economy goes down and then comes back up quickly. We've seen more traditional models where it goes down and then comes back at a very slow incremental pace. We've also seen W's where people go down and back up, kind of like what California may experience shortly where they're going back into a lockdown mode. Needless to say, we've taken an extremely conservative approach to ensure we position the county in a fiscal manner that will make us viable going forward, and that's what the revenues reflect through both fiscal years. So if we start with the first fiscal year, the current year we're in, as the Administrator said, we have about a $6.9 million shortfall. As you can see on the screen, that's broken out between our general revenues, which do include our gas taxes, our tourist development taxes, which clearly took a very aggressive hit, and then our share of the Blueprint infrastructure sales tax. To get in front of all this, the Administrator did institute a hiring freeze back in February. We stopped all non-essential travel and training, and we implemented and started several capital project deferrals and operating reductions. To get through the rest of the fiscal year, Commissioners, we've instituted further operating reductions, including keeping the hiring freeze in place, travel and training freeze, additional operating reductions, things such as stopping all carpet and painting. We have several programs that were impacted by the pandemic that are just not happening as a virtue of the inability to social distance, such as our Summer Youth and our Leon Works. We've also reduced the number of our contracts. In addition, Commissioners, we deferred or eliminated several capital projects, including building renovations. We have some long-term plans for the exterior of the courthouse. We were setting aside funds over several years. We're going to need to defer that for several years into the future. We've also temporarily delayed replacement on some road projects. They're fine in their current condition, and we'll get back to them in future years. 2 important things we're not doing this year, Commissioners. We are not balancing the budget with layoffs or furloughs in the current year, nor something we're very pleased, we're not having to come to you looking to take any more money out of fund balance this year. Matter of fact, we've gone so far as to do a little further reductions this year to better position ourselves for next year. So we actually are reducing a little deeper this year, which will give us more cash going into next fiscal year. With that, Commissioners, I want to transition into the new fiscal year. So now we're talking about the 2021 fiscal year. The total budget, as the Administrator said, at this point in the budget process is up 2.7%. It's about $281 million. Again, there's no recommended increases in either our property taxes or any of our non-ad valorem assessments. We have no new general fund positions, and again, into next fiscal year, we're not recommending any furloughs or layoffs. In addition, one thing we are proud of that we do every year and we continuously do throughout the organization is to identify cost savings and avoidances. We have a detailed schedule as one of your attachments, but this year through the hard work of staff, and in this year in particular, working with our constitutional officers, we are saving $11 million through cost avoidances, and that brings our total number since 2013 to almost $45 million, and we have more details on that if the board would like to discuss that further. Going on now, if we drill down a little deeper, we have about $10.1 million this year. On the screen, you'll see it's broken across three major areas again. We have our general revenues at about $7.4 million, and we'll go into more detail on those in a minute. Our tourist taxes, we have them coming back a little next year, but still a very significant 25% reduction overall year over year. And again, our share of the sales tax revenues. High-level strategies for balancing, and then I'll bring you down a little further in some more detail in some following slides. Again, there's five major areas. The administrator went over them briefly, and we did go through extensive narrative we do in your briefings. Operating budget reductions. This includes the travel training freeze. We'll get to more detail in a minute. And again, these four other major areas: maintain the capital budget, the debt service reduction due to paying down debt, the pickup by not having a presidential election cycle next year, and in this situation, increasing use of our fund balance from $1.5 million to $3 million, which we'll talk about again in a second. So now if we transition, commissioners, and we'll have three slides now, a little more detail. One, we'll talk about revenues, then we'll talk about expenditure increases, and another we'll talk about expenditure decreases. This is in your materials. You have a long table, but to try to break it down as more bite-sized chunks, we've broken it across three slides for you. First, if we look at your revenue changes, we have about a $7.4 million decline, mainly due to sales tax, consumption-based taxes. You'll also see that the Fed, while it's good for people borrowing money and refinancing, has brought the interest rates basically down to near zero. That will have an impact on our portfolio and our investments, so we're anticipating close to a $900,000 decline in interest earnings. You'll also see we have a projected $500,000 decline in gas taxes. Again, people driving less, but also the long-term impacts we've talked about in the past of more fuel-efficient cars and electric cars. And until such time as we have a more of a mileage-driven tax, we're going to continue to see that decline as gas taxes are consumption-based taxes. Overall, you'll see at the very bottom, the net of the increase in the property tax revenue of $9.2 million offset by that revenue decline ends up providing about a $1.8 million net increase. Overall, the organization, when you take in consideration the constitutional officers, inflation, governmental inflation, open the doors of county government each year. It takes anywhere between $11 to $12 to $13 million a year to maintain our current levels of service. So that $1.8 million clearly gives us a large hole we had to cover. On top of that, you'll see the next line down, $1.457 million increase in fund balance. That would bring our increase of fund balance to $3 million. Still well below what we were using at the peak of the Great Recession, which we were up to $5 million. But again, it's very deliberate in that that will position us next year. If we do need to go a little deeper into fund balance next year, we've held some money back there. So bottom line is we have about a net change of our resources of $3.2 million. Transitioning to what are those impacts of cost increases. And what you'll see here is an aggregation of that table in your materials. Of course, you'll see at the top of the list the continued commitment to public safety. This does have the sheriff's budget request in here as requested. We are also providing the overall cost of county government personnel. We do have an 18% increase included in there for mandatory retirement payments, and as well as projected increased costs for the county share of health insurance. On top of that, commissioners, you saw in your materials, we did have a very large growth in the CRA payment this year. In the Frenchtown area in particular, there was a 40% growth in the values in that area. So, and between that and the downtown, you'll see the increase of $750,000. Our total payment next year, commissioners, in the CRAs will be $3.5 million. We also have required payments the county makes for Medicaid, Department of Juvenile Justice for housing of juveniles. We have workers' compensation requirements to make our claims. We also have increased costs of contractual services for things to support our computer security, our required custodial, which is very important in this time of the pandemic. We also have ongoing required interlocal agreements with the city for the animal shelter. We have the joint funding of the planning department, as well as our 800 megahertz system. And finally, commissioners, we have included the board's direction from March to increase funding for CHSP. So to handle the revenues on the previous slide and increase expenditures, you'll see here now aggregated the expenditure information or the reductions we've been talking about, Vince and I, since the beginning of this morning's workshop. What you see is a continued effort at belt tightening. This was very difficult to accomplish with having very minimal impact to services. Without these efforts, obviously this would have been much harder. You'll see down there about 4 lines down the hiring freeze. As we've said from the beginning, we're going to recommend keeping that in place 6 months into the new fiscal year. Depending on how next fiscal year progresses, if for some reason the revenue forecast or things decline worse than anticipated due to the pandemic, that hiring freeze could be extended further. Similarly, we have the same situation with our travel and training freeze. That also is for another 6 months, but we can go further if warranted. You'll also see, we talked about this in the budget materials extensively. We're very excited about the library technology checkout and collection management services. This is going to be an added benefit to the public in terms of speed of checking their books out, less contact as well from a COVID standpoint, but also from the collection management, we're going to be able to more targeted purchases for our community that meet our needs. And on doing that, we're going to be able to eliminate several vacant positions and save $350,000 recurring. And we recommended in the item to get that started at the end of this fiscal year. Finally, commissioners, you'll see in there the supervisor elections. That's $1,060,000. In the current year, we have the presidential election, and what we always need to point out to everybody, it's not that the election's in November. The additional cost in the current year is due to the fact that you have the presidential preference primary and the additional cost for the ballots that need to go out prior to November for the absentee ballot. So that $1,060,000 next year, we don't have that additional election cycle. And finally, you'll see at the end there, we have the debt service savings that we've been paying those down for several years, and we're picking up $4 million, which is instrumental in our ability to balance the current year budget. So to summarize, commissioners, we're pleased to recommend a budget with no increase in property tax, fees, or assessments, no general revenue positions. We did talk in briefings about some additional trucks for EMS that will be offset directly by their fees for those services. We do have a revenue loss of $10.1 million, but we've accommodated that through cost-saving measures and the things we just talked about. And you'll see the bottom of the list is a little repeat of what I just told you with the hiring freeze, the fund balance, and the debt service, bring you again to that final budget increase of $2.74 million. So to conclude, Commissioner, we have an option for you to proceed with developing the budget as recommended and to address the shortfalls as recommended. So with that, I'll turn it back to the Chairman and Administrator.
All right, thank you guys. It's customary, before we really get into the meat of the discussion, if it's okay with you guys, we'll just do once around just to kind of take the temperature of everybody. It kind of sets the tone for the day. So if you have some general comments without getting into the meat of the actual material, I'll just wander around real quickly. If you'd like to speak up, I'll start. I'm just doing this. Commissioner Lindley, would you like to make any opening comments?
Oh, yeah, thank you very much. Well, just to say thank you to the staff, Scott and Alan, everybody, and the county administrator. This is an amazing amount of work, and separating it into the 2 years of troubles is great. We appreciate that. I'm really proud to be able to not have any furloughs or layoffs on our amazing county staff, because my goodness, everybody's been working just overtime in every sense of the word, I think, lately, very hard. It's been a struggle. So thank you for that. Also, I just wanted to say I think it was about 2 years ago that we decided to be refinancing and redoing our bond structure, and we save money. And it was one of those meetings where you're kind of thinking not very sexy, not too exciting, and yet it really has paid off in a cost savings that is very helpful to us right now. So thank you for that. I also noticed we still have, I think the county administrator said 4 more years of payments to the downtown and Frenchtown and Southside CRAs. And so that is a kind of a big lift for us since the county's no longer part of the CRA decision making. And I just wanted to confirm how much more time that the county will be making contributions to that. Did you feel like it's another?
Sure.
We're not going to be affected by it now.
Yes, we have 4 more years in the downtown pursuant to our agreement that you may recall, and Frenchtown is about 20 more years on the Frenchtown. The downtown is probably one that you're thinking of, which is has a termination coming up relatively soon in the next 4 years.
Thank you. Anyway, thank you very much. I look forward to the discussion.
Okay.
Have a couple of things I would like us to reconsider, but I'll hear the rest comments
Okay.
too. Thanks.
Commissioner Maddox, some opening comments?
Mr. Chair, I just look forward to a good budget workshop. I think staff has done an amazing job of making sure that we have something good to look at here today and to work from. Thank this board and staff and our finance staff in prior years for budgeting approvingly so that we can be in a place where we don't have to do furloughs and we don't have to look at laying people off and things of that nature. And so I'm very proud to be a part of this board, very proud of the things that we've done in the past, and very proud of staff for putting us in this position. I look forward to the conversation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Commissioner Dozier, opening comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just building on what others have said already, this is an incredible document and work product from our staff, but also our partners, particularly on the CARES Act, but I know on our budget as well. It covers all of our departments, but we've really reached out to partners throughout the community, and that is an extra lift for our staff, Mr. County Administrator and Madam Attorney, and the evidence is really phenomenal of the options, the analysis. But I also, in thinking about something Commissioner Lindley said, not only did we do the maybe not so sexy, debt restructuring, but the awards program and the LEADS program that identifies savings. I think it's a lot more than this, Ms. County Administrator, but just the awards program, our staff has identified 6.9 million to date in savings. So I think it really stands out to me right now that the planning, fiscal responsibility, and investment in our community that we've done coming out of the Great Recession in the last few years, knowing that we could face another emergency, another challenge at any point, has positioned us well for this this unprecedented time. But it should not be lost that our staff did something that I hate to say, I think a lot of governments didn't do at all different levels. And you took this seriously in February. And I just very much want to thank you, Mr. County Administrator, all the staff, for looking at options in February, knowing that something could happen. And that's really important. So appreciate that and look forward to the discussion today.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Minor, opening comments?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Before we got the agenda materials for the workshop, I was dreading this meeting because I knew that we were going to have some severe reductions in revenue, and I felt we were going to have to make a tough decision on what programs to cut, what major cuts we need to take to make sure we didn't increase the millage rate. There have been big cuts. There have been some big, tremendous amount of work done on this budget. But I'm very happy with the way things have turned out. It's really a testament to the work that the county administrator, Alan, Scott, and all of the team have done to get us to this point. We've got, as Alan just said, $12 million in increased expenses for the coming year. And those are things that we are contractually bound to provide, statutory requirements, public safety requirements. Those are real expenses that have increased. And yet we're still able to maintain the current millage rate, not add any additional fees, increase CHSP by 10%, which is really an important step given the pandemic that we're in right now. So this is an incredible amount of work that's been done by staff leading up to today. Very grateful for that. And it's a testament to the resiliency of Leon County's government, right? I mean, the big belt tightening, I think we all remember, is from 2007, 2008, when some of you were on the commission then. I mean, that was severe belt tightening then. And it's always been very rigid financial management since then, reducing the debt service that we have, making sure that we are strong financially, which has enabled us to make these really great steps today. So I'm very, very happy with what staff has done, really want to commend them, and looking forward to the rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Is Commissioner Commissioner Proctor, I'm sorry. We have Commissioner Proctor on the line? I can't see from here, Michelle. Do we have Commissioner Jackson? Commissioner Jackson, are you with us?
Hey, everybody.
Welcome back. We're all thinking about you.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, man. I am glad to be upright, no doubt. I just will be brief. This to the people of Leon County is during such a time of uncertainty and unbelievable stress and strains that are placed on all of our lives is comforting news. And the work of staff, Mr. Administrator, Alan, Scott, the entire Leon County staff that took part in this budget, it is no less than phenomenal in that it includes no increases in property taxes, no layoffs, and no furloughs. And those are things that mean jobs and mean security during a time where there's so much uncertainty going on around us. And to be able to do that type of work for the people of Leon County is nothing short of amazing. I'm proud to be a very small part of that process. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. Glad to see you upright. I'll finish. Let me just echo a lot of the comments that have been made. I like Commissioner Minor. I was dreading seeing what the product looked like. I walked into the administrator's office a month or so ago and I said, so we've had the pandemic, we've had the protests, we're now in hurricane season. What's up next? Killer bees? And they said, wait till you see the budget. And so that was not something so all I can say is wow. And I will say, as the administrator commented earlier, the budget process is an ongoing process. Those of us who've been doing this, we touch this all year long and it goes years and years and years. But this particular product is the product of 5 to 10 years of what I would call fiscal prudence and fiscal discipline, which we are now benefiting from all the hard work that's been done for the past 5 or 10 years, because there are a lot of counties that are not in the same position we are that cannot figure out a way to get through this without some really hard decisions. So my hat's off to the staff, to Scott and Alan and all the budget team and everybody who's been doing this, and for everybody that got us to this point. This is like going to the gym every day and at some point you get in a car wreck. Well, guess what? If you're in pretty good shape and you're ready for it, you can get through it okay. It hurts, it's painful, and there's some rehab, but at the end of the day, we're going to get through this. So anyway, with that, I'll open it up for just general discussion. I assume we would take a motion to approve this unless there's some comments or some direction to amend or change it. Commissioners?
No movement, Mr. Chair.
I have a motion from Commissioner Maddox to accept as presented. Is there a second? Commissioner Minor seconded. Okay. Any other discussion on what we've talked about so far as just the general overall? I'm looking out there. I don't see. Is anybody waiting? Okay.
We're waiting for the budget discussion.
Okay. We have a motion. We have a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposition? Okay. That's the 40,000 foot level. Okay. You're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioners, we've got, as I mentioned, just a few budget discussion items. And before we get to the big item, which will be the CARES item, and the first one, budget discussion item number 2, seeks your consideration of a donation of Pimlico and Man of War parks from the Killearn Acres Homeowners Association of Leon County. Commissioners, you'll recall this item from your January 28th meeting when you gave us the direction to bring this back for your consideration here at the budget workshop. And what we've prepared for you all is an analysis to consider the acceptance of 2 neighborhood parks from Killearn Acres Homeowners Association. Commissioners, recently the Killearn Lakes HOA has experienced increasing costs to maintain and keep their parks open, and to further avoid the deterioration of the parks, the HOA would like to donate them to the county, with the only consideration or the only conditions being that the park remain passive and in nature, and that the parks would be open to the public and not just the Killearn Acres Homeowners Association residents. as noted in your materials, commissioners, if the county had to purchase these parks instead of accept the donation, it would have been at a considerable cost. This is a nominal cost from a recurring standpoint, and the funding is included in the preliminary budget, and obviously it helps us toward several of our goals and strategic initiatives to add to our inventory of parks offerings to our community. And with that, we are recommending option 1.
All right, Commissioner, I see Commissioner Maddox has his hand up.
Move approval, Mr. Chair.
I would happily second that as a district commissioner. Any other discussion? I would also note that it has been challenging on the north side of town to find public park property. It's just, the fact is it's expensive. It's lots of slopes. It's been a difficult transit process. So this is not only working with this particular neighborhood, which frankly is struggling a little bit, this homeowners, but it opens up some public spaces for people in the Northeast, which I think is a big positive. So any discussion? Anybody else? Okay. All in favor of the motion as made by Commissioner Maddox, which I seconded, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Motion carries with 2 commissioners out of, sounds like Commissioner Jackson is off again, I guess.
No, I'm on.
Okay. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Okay. So 6 with Commissioner Proctor out of chambers. Okay. Next up, Mr. Administrator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This next item in Commissioner's budget discussion, item number 3, seeks your consideration and is more of a status report really on the long-term funding support of the Kearney Center. You'll hear much more in our CARES item about our homelessness situation and how we're addressing that on many fronts. But as requested by the board, this item provides an analysis for your consideration of the county's long-term funding support of the Kearney Center. Commissioners, as discussed in your briefings, through previous payments or future commitments, the county has contributed $2.7 million toward the construction and operation of the Kearney Center. For the next year's budget, the Kearney Center is participating in the CHSP process, and the budget includes our $100,000 capital commitment. The Kearney Center is not seeking any additional funding from the county at this time, but has certainly expressed an interest to develop more of a shared model with their governmental partners, notwithstanding what I've already explained to you and what the analysis supports, which has been a very, very significant commitment on behalf of the county and the city, I should note. But with that, we're recommending option 1.
All right, I've got Commissioner Maddox up. Commissioner Maddox.
Mr. Chair, move staff recommendation.
We have a motion. Is that Commissioner Lindley? Did you second that? I saw.
Yes.
Okay, got a motion and a second. Commissioner Dozier, you're on deck.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I really appreciate this analysis. I think we've all had a lot of conversations about the Kearney Center, and certainly know the extent of the needs and how much incredible work that they have done in partnership with so many others, including, of course, the county and the task force, helping keep people safe in recent months. I did note, and I know we'll get to the CARES Act, that there are some monies there for homelessness. I believe, and I mean, it's in the item, but I think there's a lot of money coming through the CARES Act to the city. And I think for this piece of the puzzle, it would probably be in our interest to come back and look at it again. I don't know, Mr. County Administrator, maybe in October or something, at your direction, when you think it might be appropriate. This is a long-term need. Kearney Center, I think has a good goal to get, to invert the percentages. So they have more donations or less donations and more public financing. But I really want to make sure that we're working in conjunction with the continuum of care and everyone else and keep this moving forward. The only other thing I was going to mention is it has been a substantial contribution through CHSP and capital improvements for the Kearney Center, both looking back the last 5 years, but also going forward to 2024. I would really love for us to have a goal to, forgive me, but not see another request for the building, for example, in another 3 or 4 years. I think working with the Carney Center to make sure we don't have a crisis in 2024 and we're back in the same position benefits all of us, benefits their organization, benefits city and county. And the very last thing is just there were some questions about changing. I know that was one of the options. It's not in the motion, changing the CHSP guidelines. And I'm happy with the motion as is. Did not want to do that, but I just thought there's enough people who have emailed us about that issue. It might be good just to mention it. It is not part of this motion, and I'm really, I couldn't support it if it was. So thank you very much.
Good. Commissioners, any?
Mr. Chair. Mr. County Administrator, if you forgive me, Mr. Chair, did you have any thoughts about just looking at this and seeing how the CARES Act and other ESG funding and where we are in October or November? Do you think that might be appropriate for us?
Sure. Since we've got an item coming back to you in October rather, on the CARES item, I think the timing would be good. So I'd be happy to do that.
And you don't need a motion for that or anything?
I don't think so, because I think we've kind of contemplated bringing that back as a part of what we'd be bringing to you at that time.
Anything else on this particular item? I would just offer, we are lucky as a community to have somebody like Rick Carney who has stepped in and filled the void. And while there's a lot of moving parts to this, and certainly him and Liza and the whole Carney Center stepped up in a big way. You know, when this pandemic started, there were certain parts of our community, healthcare, seniors, and the homeless population was another one that really was put into a state of disarray. And so I know they really jumped through hoops, and thanks to staff for helping figure out how to work through it. And I know there's a lot of money that flows through the system, but we are a better community for the work that Rick has done and his philanthropic efforts. So I'm thankful for that. So with that, we have a motion. We have a second. Any other discussion on favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Motion carries with Commissioner Proctor out of chambers, I believe. Thank you. Next up, Mr. Administrator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioners, budget discussion item number 4 seeks your consideration to finalize a contract to pursue financing for an energy savings performance contractor services contract, or what is commonly referred to as an ESCO. Commissioners, this agenda item seeks your approval to enter into a long-term guaranteed energy savings performance contract with Energy Savings Group, ESG, for the implementation of cost-saving, more energy-efficient building-related capital projects valued at $17 million. Through this program, the county will finance $17 million to pay for these projects. All of the costs will be recouped by the county through energy savings over the life of the project, approximately 25 years, while the full $17 million will be fully recouped by the county, again, over a 25-year period. The financing for the project is recommended over a 15-year term to take advantage of more favorable interest rates for the county. So as such, the financing over the 15-year term will be serviced through a combination of energy savings and general revenue. But again, I'll stress that there is a guaranteed payback to ensure that all of the investment is covered by the energy savings. And with that, Commissioners, we're recommending options 1 and 2, and happy to answer any questions you might have.
Move
All
option
right,
1 and 2.
Commissioner Minor.
Move option 1 and 2.
Okay, and I see Commissioner Dozier, are you seconding that? Okay. All right, we have a motion, we have a second. Discussion. Commissioner Dozier.
I didn't mean to do that, Mr. Chair, sorry. Thank you. All I wanted to say, and this kind of reflects back on our comments at the opening, this is long-term planning. And this is, it's not just an environmental benefit, but it's a major benefit in cost savings for Leon County and therefore for the taxpayers. So to be able to move forward with this at this time and to keep this going, I'm sure we've all reflected on this, that this is our our fourth emergency declaration in 5 years. We know even though this one looks different, we know we'll be back here. So I'm just really thrilled that we can keep this moving. Thank you, Mr. County Administrator. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Good comments. Anybody else? Commissioner Minor?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just want to say this is a great project. Really support ESCO, the concept of it, and very excited, enthusiastic about this. Thank you.
All right. Any other comments on this item? We have a motion. We have a second. I would also say the great long-term, I mean, this is one of those things that's takes a while to put the contracts in place and the devil's in the details, but frankly, having a partnership like this long-term pays off for everybody. So with that, all in favor of the motion as signified, signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Motion carries 6-0 with Commissioner Proctor out of chambers. Next up, Mr. County Administrator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Rounding out your budget discussion items, and before we get to the final item, which is the CARES item, this item seeks the establishment of the maximum millage rates for the FY21 tentative budget. Commissioners, pursuant to Florida statutes, this item seeks your direction in establishing the annual maximum millage rate for utilization in the truth in millage process, or the TRIM process. As discussed earlier, the 21 budget is tentatively balanced with no increase in either the county-wide or the EMS millage rates. At your public hearing in September, these rates can only be decreased. They cannot be increased at that time. So with that, Commissioners, staff is recommending the approval of options 1 and 2.
Okay, Commissioners.
I'll move approval.
We have a
Second.
motion from Commissioner Dozier, a second from Commissioner Minor. Comments? This is huge. 9 years, same millage. I mean, that's not common, and hats off to everybody that got us to this point. Any other discussion? Yes, sir. Commissioner. Yes, ma'am. Pardon me, Commissioner Dozier.
It's okay. It's going to be a long day, Mr. Chair. I'm sure we'll all do it. So I'm not sure if this is appropriate to say at this point, but just overall, I think we always get some questions about increased property values, and we're lucky to come out of a few years where property values were going up. We did keep the millage rate, level, so that brought in a little bit more revenue as we recovered from the recession. Keeping it level this year helps with the extreme budget deficit that we have, but I know all of us are keeping in mind that we don't know what's going to happen in the next few years. Property values could start to go down if things get a lot worse. So I'm really glad we're not increasing any fees or taxes, but I'm also glad that we're holding it steady. And I know that there will be some who are hurting right now and may question that. I think the next item, mortgage assistance, other things like that are coming from the state, really help mitigate the impact and keep services going. So this is great, as you said, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Or Madam Chair.
Touche. All right. I'm losing my mind. Commissioner Jackson.
Hey, just a brief comment. I would just agree with many of Kristen's comments as well. Excuse me, Commissioner Dozier, sorry, I'll get better. That holding property taxes and not adding that burden or the additional millage rate is a phenomenal piece of work. And I know it all ties in back to the budget work that's been done. But again, I can't echo enough about how important it is during these times to have some things that people in our community can rely on. And the work that Leon County does and has done in this process is kind of exemplified in that regardless of what emergencies come along and what unexpected situations occur, that somehow, some way, after all the numbers are crunched, we are able to take at least one stress or one little burden off of people that are dealing with a lot of deep issues right now. And again, that goes back to the staff, but also Mr. Chairman, you get to at least have one great notch on your belt for this year of difficult work as chairman.
Thank you. Any other discussion? All right, we have a motion. We have a second. All in favor of the motion as presented, signify by saying aye. Aye. All right, motion carries 6-0. Commissioner Proctor out of chambers. All right, that brings us to the meat of the CARES, right?
It does.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioners, item number 6 seeks your approval of a proposed, what we're calling a Leon CARES, Expenditure and Implementation Plan. I'll take a deep breath in on this one and try to get through it. It's pretty comprehensive, as you've all seen, and of course we've had extensive briefings with each of you on this, and Alan and I are going to sort of tag team this one. But I'll begin, Commissioners. The item seeks your consideration again of a proposed Leon CARES Expenditure and Implementation Plan to approve the county's allocation of up to $51.2 million in coronavirus relief funds under the CARES Act. Commissioners, you'll recall from previous updates, Congress included a $150 billion CARES Act funding for state and local governments to offset necessary expenses due to COVID-19. Local governments with populations greater than 500 received direct allocations of this funding from the Treasury. However, those with less than 500 population, the CARES Act allowed states to distribute the funding to local governments at the state's discretion. On June 10th, the governor announced the state's plan to distribute funds to the 55 counties that did not receive the allocation directly from the Treasury based on population. So based on the formula, Leon County is eligible to receive reimbursement of up to $51.2 million for qualified expenditure reimbursement. At the June 16th meeting, Commissioners, I brought to you a funding agreement with the Division of Emergency Management so that we would be eligible to receive these funds and the first allocation of these funds. As I reported to you during that meeting, Commissioners, the CARES Act includes very specific criteria for the utilization of these funds. To summarize, these funds can only be used to cover necessary unbudgeted expenses related to COVID-19 public health emergency, and funds must be spent by December 30th. Given the limited uses and the time-sensitive nature of these funds, the board also provided the direction for me to bring back this expenditure plan for the board's consideration at this workshop. Commissioners, the proposed plan before you, Leon CARES, includes a broad range of recommended funding allocations to provide financial relief and to stimulate economic recovery throughout the community. The plan contemplates funding for essential public health and safety expenditures related to COVID-19, including significant enhancement of community testing and contact tracing capabilities, direct assistance to individuals experiencing financial hardship, funding for a variety of human services needs, and critical economic relief to the local business community. Additionally, Commissioners, the plan provides for the reimbursement of eligible COVID-related expenses incurred by the county, the city, and our constitutional and judicial officers. As you'll see, Commissioners, in the budget discussion item before you, we've conducted extensive research and analysis in developing the funding recommendations presented in the Leon CARES plan. Since Congress passed the CARES Act back in March, on March 27th, we have been evaluating the statutory requirements in the bill, as well as the guidance issued by the Treasury on all eligible uses of these funds. At the same time, we've worked hard with FAC and NACO and our state and federal lobbying teams to ensure that the county received this funding. We've reviewed all this in detail, and the spending plans adopted by other local governments that were directly funded through the Treasury. We had the benefit of those 12 counties that went first, and to identify their strategies and best practices, which are reflected in the item before you. And as I say with confidence, the Leon County CARES plan is probably more detailed and more targeted than any of the plans that we've reviewed to date, and certainly any of those which were, I think, presented to a commission at this point in the process for their review. So we've also coordinated extensively, Commissioners, with our healthcare partners, our human services partners, and the business community to identify the needs that exist and any funding gaps that can be filled with these funds. So that work has occurred prior to us getting here today, and upon your approval today, we will be ready to hit the ground running. The recommended funding allocations, Commissioners, in the plan reflect specific feedback that we received from all of these partners. And as you'll see from the item, Commissioners, the Leon CARES Plan proposes 3 important funding categories, which are based on specific eligible uses of funds provided by the federal guidance. And I'll hit just the high points in these categories. And in a moment, as I mentioned, I'm going to hand it off to Alan, who's going to drill down even deeper in each one of these categories. So the first category recommends allocating $18.2 million for public health, safety, and compliance. This category provides funding for the Leon County Health Department and our local FQHCs to support enhanced testing, contact tracing, particularly with high-risk areas of our community. This category includes funding to support expanded testing and contact tracing should the need arise throughout the life of the pandemic. Finally, the category includes funds to recover eligible COVID-related expenses incurred by the county, the city, and constitutional judicial officers related to their operations. This also allows us to purchase additional PPE and supplies to anticipate additional waves of the virus, Commissioners, in this fall throughout the upcoming hurricane season and throughout the flu season later this year. The second category, Commissioners, recommends approximately $23 million for individual, community, and small business assistance. Again, we'll get into more detail on these categories, but as you'll see discussed throughout the budget discussion item, the federal legislation enacted by Congress to date has provided significant expansion of federal assistance available to individuals and businesses. These included direct stimulus payments, expanded unemployment assistance, a moratorium on residential evictions, the Paycheck Protection Program, which provided forgivable loans to small businesses. However, many of these sources of assistance are time limited, and it's not clear whether Congress will extend them further. As a result, there's a need for continued economic relief and assistance, which the county is able to provide through this Leon CARES program. We've worked, Commissioners, with UPHS, the human services agencies, our local business community to identify not only the needs that currently exist, but also future needs that may arise if these sources of federal assistance are allowed to expire. Accordingly, Commissioners, these categories in our plan, in the Leon County's CARES plan, recommends funding to provide direct emergency financial relief for individuals and families to help pay for past due housing and utility bills, support for a variety of community-wide social services needs, and direct assistance to local businesses throughout the county, as well as our 3 local chambers of commerce to stimulate our economic recovery. All of this assistance will be available county-wide, Commissioners, for individuals and businesses located throughout Leon County. And again, we'll provide more detail on that in just a moment. And lastly, Commissioners, the plan recommends allocating $1 billion to a reserve and replenishment account. Excuse me. Sorry. We have just a technical issue here we're dealing with. Okay. Thank you, Commissioners, for that. Lastly, Commissioners, the proposed plan recommends allocating $10 million to a reserve and replenishment account. I'll pause on this one for just a moment because this is a strategic component of the proposed plan and based on best practices that other communities have adopted. This account establishes a reserve that can be allocated for any of the other funding categories based on the future needs through December 30th. As we implement the plan, we'll be tracking very closely our utilization of funds in real time to develop a clear picture of where the greatest needs occur. This reserve and replenishment account will allow us to come back later in the year and add funds as needed to programs that have the highest demand. Also, Congress is expected to consider a major legislative package over the next 2 weeks. This may include additional relief funding that flows through local governments, and Congress may also expand the uses of the existing CARE Act funds that have been allocated to the county, potentially including the replacement of revenues lost due to COVID-19. So the reserve and replenishment account also keeps a portion of our funding ready in case Congress makes significant changes affecting our plan. Commissioners, with the board's approval of the plan, I intend to bring you back a status report at your October meeting, the meeting of October 13th, and this will provide the board with the opportunity and for staff to seek any policy direction that may be needed at that time to expand the remainder or to expend the remainder of the county's allocation before the December 30th deadline. I also want to note, Commissioners, that as you'll see in the item, it's recommended that you authorize me to modify criteria for the individual assistance program specifically to get this funding out the door and where it's needed quickly. We learned that that was very important through our CEDAR and LEAN grant programs. Alan will talk more about this in detail in just a moment, but the plan contemplates an application period for rent, mortgage, and utility assistance. In order to make sure the funding goes to households with the greatest need, this application period would be open to only low-income households that have been financially impacted by COVID-19. As I mentioned, Commissioners, there is a variety of other state and federal relief that has been made available, so we won't know the level of demand until we implement the plan. So following the initial application period, Commissioners, if funds are remaining in the individual assistance program, it may be appropriate to open a second application window for both low and moderate income households. So your authorization, Commissioners, will allow us to quickly get this assistance out the door to help households in the greatest need. So just to clarify, this involves only the funding that the board authorizes for the individual program today and not the reserve or punishment account. Again, I'll be coming back to you all with those recommendations in October. Finally, Commissioners, this item recommends contracting with Ernst & Young to provide assistance with the implementation of the program. I think this is really important and a real benefit of how we're approaching this. As you'll note from the item, the implementation of our plan will involve processing thousands of applications for assistance, which will need to be processed very quickly. It will also require strict financial controls and accounting measures to ensure full compliance with the CARES Act and our funding agreement with the state. Ernst & Young will develop a system to help us administer the full life cycle of the Leon County CARES plan. This involves developing an online portal to receive applications, and they will also review all applications we receive for the individual and small business assistance program. The application portal, Commissioners, will connect to a database to collect and organize all of the documentation that we'll need to submit to the state for reimbursement. We have received very positive feedback from Hillsborough County, who's already contracted with Ernst & Young for this process, and they are in communications with several other counties for these same services. As you'll see in the item, Commissioners, we're recommending the board authorize this under the county's declared local state of emergency for procurement purposes. Ernst & Young does offer consulting services under the Florida state term contract, However, we have negotiated a preliminary agreement at a lower rate using the same terms and conditions there, and our terms and conditions are a little beyond that of the state contract, so we're recommending utilizing this route to ensure that we're in full compliance with all applicable purchasing and procurement guidelines and statutes. So, Commissioners, all the expenses related to these services are fully reimbursable under the CARES Act. And to summarize, before I hand it off to Alan, as I mentioned earlier, I cannot say enough about the level of effort that has been poured into this. Again, we got the announcement on June 10th, and it's really been an effort working around the clock on the part of a lot of folks to get to this place. The plan, again, Commissioners, reflects extensive collaboration with partners across our healthcare, human services, and local business communities, all of whom have provided extremely valuable feedback on how to best meet the needs that exist in our community resulting from the pandemic. The plan before you is structured in a way that allows for rapid implementation and a quick distribution of funds. And looking forward, the CARES plan allows for us to anticipate future needs related to COVID-19. That's very important, that may arise later in the year. And finally, it involves a dedicated services of a third-party consulting firm to establish strict accounting measures and to ensure compliance with all federal and state requirements. And with that, Commissioners, I'd like to hand it off to Alan to provide a little bit more detail into these programs. And before we hand it back to the board, we've got plenty of time for any questions that you might have. But before I hand it to Alan, I also wanted to acknowledge the work of just a few others. And I do this at great risk because so many folks have been working on this around the clock. But I need to especially point out the work of Andy Johnson, Nikki Payton and Shankton Lamming and others because of the work they've put in to this product. And with that, I'll hand it over to Alan.
Thank you, Vince. And once again, commissioners, I know you want to see me, but you're going to get the pleasure of the PowerPoint. So with that, we're going to start with a little bit of an overview. And if we go to our first slide here, if I can get to our first slide. 1 second, commissioners. A little technical issue. There we go. Thank you. So, commissioners, as the administrator said, we have a funding agreement executed with the Florida Department of Management, FDEM, who is the ones overseeing the funding on behalf of the state, to receive up to $51.2 million in reimbursement under the CARES Act. And very specifically, the federal legislation literally includes only 3 lines, but for 3 very important lines that govern how these monies shall be spent. And they're listed for you on the screen. The expenditures must be related to COVID-19. The money you spent cannot have been accounted for in your budget, which is very important, and the monies must be spent between March 1st and December 30th. So we do have the benefit of going back to seek reimbursement for expenditures already incurred, and you'll see that as we talk through the plan today. Overall, commissioners, as the administrator said, we have 3 major expenditure categories subject for reimbursement. The numbers are a little rounded on the screen for you. The numbers don't add up what you see. There's a slight rounding issue depending on the underlying numbers, but 3 major categories totaling out to the $51.2 million. Public health, safety, and compliance at $18.2 million. Individual community and small business assistance, $22.9 million, and the reserve and replenishment account, which the administrator talked about extensively. First, commissioners, we're going to break off and talk about the detailed programs underlying the public health, safety, and compliance area of the CARES Act. In this area, commissioners, the first major component is our public health safety response, which we've dedicated $6.1 million to. In this area, commissioners, we're going to be focusing on 2 major components, testing and contact tracing. In the area of testing, we're working very closely with the health department and your federal qualified health clinics, Bond and Neighbor in particular. They were going to be standing up targeted testing for high-risk areas, specifically in the zip codes of, as you'll see on your screen, 32304, 01, and 03. Based on what's currently occurring at Bragg Stadium, this will increase our overall community testing capacity by 45%, about 5,000 tests a month, about 1,200 a week. In addition, the health department has been working very hard and submitted a very extensive plan to enhance their contact tracing. They're going to be putting on 4 teams of scores of people. They've already started the onboarding process as we speak. Through this effort, they're going to be able to do 600 additional cases a week and up to 2,000 individual contacts. And of course, Claudia is always available to answer any more specifics on that. In addition, commissioners, we set aside in the dollar figures and on your screen, but we put aside $3.1 million to dedicate for possible future expanded community testing. We don't know what the future holds for these individual sites the state has stood up, or if we have an additional need. We set aside the funding. The health department has identified plans and programs to stand up those sites with community partners if needed in the future. And lastly, in this area, Commissioner, we will be able to provide our primary healthcare partners funding to reimburse them for costs incurred or to be incurred for PPE and cleaning supplies, et cetera. If we go to the next area of this element, Commissioners, we have our government response and compliance, about $12.1 million. We've broken this up into 3 specific areas. First, consistent with the agreement with the state, we will be sharing funding with the city of Tallahassee at a level of commensurate with what Leon County government will be doing at $5 million. They've identified preliminary costs related to their PPE, their teleworking, et cetera, and their emergency response. Those, again, will all have to comply with the requirements of the CARES Act as well as the state funding agreement. The constitutional officers we've been working very closely with, as you can imagine, they too have incurred significant expenditures related to the response and anticipated expenditures moving through the end of this calendar year. For example, in our supervisor's elections office, they've identified extensive costs to deal with the anticipated large influx of additional vote by mail expenses. For our courtrooms, through the judicial areas, we've been dealing with new technology. In the detention center, they've had extensive modeling and renovations and overtime costs to quarantine and deal with their inmates. Lastly, Commissioners, for Leon County government, we've had facility improvements, teleworking, PPP for hurricanes, enhanced protocols for EMS, non-congregate homeless sheltering costs. One area, and we've anticipated a large dollar figure in here for dealing with publicizing the Leon Cares program specifically. One thing we've included in here is our FEMA match. Commissioners, we're going to make sure that anything that is FEMA eligible, since we're in a national declared state of emergency, we will be able to seek reimbursement for many of our emergency protective measures through FEMA. We would expect the same of the city as well, and that's what they'll be doing prior to seeking funding from us. As part of that, there's typically a 25% match. The benefit of the CARES Act is anything we seek through FEMA, we'll be able to then use these dollars for our match funding, so we would not have to come out of pocket as we normally would for that match component. Moving on, Commissioners, I'm going to spend some time now on your individual, community, and small business assistance category, and we'll break this down into about 6 or 7 specific slides. First, Commissioners, we've set aside $7.5 million to stand up an individual assistance program. This will be critical support for up to 3,000 low-income individuals, and as the Administrator said, we're going to first target low-income individuals who experience financial hardship due to COVID-19. We're predicating that based on HUD low-income thresholds, about 80% of our area median income. These dollars will go directly towards individuals with the goal of keeping people in their homes. We will provide relief for rent, mortgage, and utilities, and if in the event that we need to open subsequent application cycles, we've identified a process to do that. And we'd expand and modify the program criteria at that time. Also, in this area of expenditures, Commissioners, we would recommend contracting directly with Second Harvest of the Big Bend for $3.3 million. Through this, we would be able to leverage their existing network of 135 food pantries, soup kitchens, et cetera, as opposed to Leon County government attempting to go establish all those individual relationships. We've noticed this in some of the large counties that went before us, that this was a best practice they did in standing up their programs, and we identified it as an opportunity here locally. Within this, Commissioners, we have numerous programs that Second Harvest has identified. Their children nutrition program they'll expand, their senior grocery program they'll expand. They'll also be providing additional meals for the homeless and at risk, and also they're going to expand 2 additional mobile feedings on a weekly basis. Again, there's much more detail in your item, including about a 5 or 6 page detail analysis submitted by Second Harvest themselves. In aggregate, Commissioners, they're identifying the ability to provide over 3 million more meals to the most vulnerable populations of our community through December of this year, and we're excited about that partnership. In the area of local human service assistance, Commissioners, we work very closely through, as the Administrator said, through Shinkton Shop and through UPHS in identifying a program that we think is going to be very beneficial to the community. We are recommending up to $20,000 of one-time assistance based on the math, up to 100 local human service agencies. We don't know all of the program needs that are occurring in the community on the street level. This will allow individual human service agencies that are providing direct services to the public to submit applications to us to help clients. In addition, if they've experienced their own cost for PPE, personal cost, facility retrofits, those will also be eligible through this. We'll stand up that application period probably in the next month, and we'll work closely with UPHS in making sure everybody's aware that those dollars are available. As the Administrator said in his opening comments, and you heard in the previous budget discussion item, we've also identified additional funds through CARES for the homelessness support. We had the homelessness task force stood up through emergency management about 4 or 5 months ago. All the community partners have been highly coordinated, ensuring we're responding to that particular population in our community. Working through the task force and the partners, they have also received extensive funding through the CARES Act, the city, the Big Bend COC. Identifying where those dollars go first, we're to help them move individuals into rapid rehousing and try to get people out of the individual motels and hotels they're in now and moving into more permanent housing. Our funds then, which are a little unique, would be when people are getting ready to move back into the congregate settings to make sure we've identified the proper social distance within those facilities. Particularly, we've identified HVAC systems and widening of public entrances and redesigning of eating spaces, et cetera, across the Kearney Center, Hope Community, Capital City Youth Services, and Refuge House. We have $1 million identified for these entities to do that. In addition, the Kearney Center is also independently seeking FEMA reimbursement for the funds they've already expended on their hotels. Moving to our next subcategory, Commissioners, we've identified child care support. Again, this came up through a lot of stakeholder conversations, identifying gaps in service that are occurring in the community right now. we'd recommend entering into a contract with the Early Learning Coalition of the Big Bend. Currently, the board may be aware that they do provide vouchers for individuals who are up to 100% of federal poverty. The state then came in and filled a gap for essential workers in the areas of public safety and first responders. What this program would do would be identify another gap that's out there for other first responders, but this is more aligned with your food service workers, your grocery store workers, et cetera. Working with the Early Learning Coalition, I think we identified in your materials that would identify the income threshold. Right now that's set at 200% of FPL, more of our ALICE population. The ELC currently has a waiting list of about 100 to 125 individuals. So right now we'd identify 200 eligible households for $800 in monthly assistance. As the administrator said, if this program is successful and the need is identified to be greater, we always can come back to the board later and reallocate some of the replenishment fund to this particular program. In addition, commissioners, through our healthcare community, we've identified a need with our emergency mental health services. We're recommending contracting with the Big Bend 211 for them to put on 2 additional mental health triage specialists. We've seen an incredible increase in suicide call volume from January through May of this year compared to last year, and this was the identified gap. The services are available. The issue is getting the people to the services, and we think this will fill in that specific need. Moving on now, how to help the local small business community. We're recommending a $6 million program to stand up our small business assistance program. This is built on the foundation of our previous CEDAR program. We're recommending right now that we anticipate we would get about 3,100 small businesses that would be eligible for this program, where we would have the funding for. The program would fund things for employee wages, vendor bills, rents, utilities, promotion, et cetera, as these people move to their reopening. We built this off the platform of the CEDAR grant awards previously, based on your number of employees. This would go from $1,500 to $6,000. The only change is in CEDAR, we stopped at 50 employees. This program will go from 50 to 100 employees, and we'll have one more program area in there that will get you up to the $6,000. In addition, in working closely, Ms. Paredes working with her stakeholder group, we've identified 3 supplemental awards that can all be awarded to any business that applies. These are all $500, and they're categories as your hardest hit business. These would be in your area of food service, retail, trade, and they have to demonstrate a 50% revenue loss due to COVID. Any of the minority women certified businesses would be eligible for another $500, and a category we've described as rebounding businesses, where the business is hiring 2 or more individuals. Again, that'd be $1,500 on top of the base award. So individuals could get up to $7,500 if they meet all the criteria and are one of our larger small businesses. To ensure the success of that program and to help training, we've also identified a need to contract with our 3 local chambers of commerce. These would be restart, relaunch, reopening training opportunities. They would be providing specific trainings to help these businesses go through the transition to accommodate all of the new social distancing requirements. In addition, we identified a need in CEDAR that while the Ernst Young program will have a dedicated phone support and everything but online, we'll also be contracting with the chambers to do on-the-ground, in-person assistance if somebody needs additional support in getting their documents and information into the application itself. So we'll have that program up and running. Transitioning, commissioners, to our last program category, which is our reserve and replenishment account. Again, commissioners, we saw this throughout the state as a best practice. It identifies a specific purpose for 3 things, as you see on the screen: future unanticipated needs. We do anticipate that the federal guidance may change come August, but again, we won't know until Congress finalizes it, and the ability where we do see success in programs, we can replenish those accounts later. Finally, in that area, commissioners, the administrator will be bringing back on October 13th an agenda item to seek your approval based on recommendations we'd make at that time. Finally, to summarize, again, the Ernst Young Consulting Services, we believe this will provide expeditious and compliant use of all our funds. We've seen very positive feedback from other communities using it. It would administer the full life cycle of our program dollars through December. We're anticipating, commissioners, up to 6,100 applications that will be reviewed and to ensure compliance with all the accounting rules and all of the CARES Act rules, and provide that centralized portal that all of our expenditures will be documented in one final location. In my final slide before I turn it back to the administrative commissioners is next steps. We've been having very ongoing active discussions with FDEM. They've been very responsive to any questions we've had. We're also trying to work through with them the logistics of reimbursement versus advancement of funds to ensure we have adequate cash flow to support all of the programs we've identified. Specifically on the ground, we've been working in anticipation today closely with the county attorney's office to make sure we have sub-grantee agreements ready to go. We anticipate launching those in the next 5 and 10 days so people will know where they're at. For example, the Second Harvest, the Big Bend 211, all of our areas will be sending materials out to them to get agreements executed so that they can be confident they'll get reimbursed for their expenses. We've also, working with Ernst Young, we'll kick this program off in the next day or so. We would anticipate launching our portal by mid-August for the individual and business assistance. CMR, under Matt Cavell's group, will be actively promoting Leon Cares throughout once we get up and running to make sure everybody knows where to go and how to access these funds. Through the administrator's weekly updates to the board, he has his daily update. We'll be providing weekly updates as part of that on the Leon Cares program to make sure the board is well aware of everything we're doing regarding the CARES Act and Leon Cares. And lastly, commissioners, in your October meeting, we will be bringing you an agenda item for the allocation of the reserves, as well as any reallocation of funds between the programs. And with that, commissioners, I'll turn it back to the administrator.
Thank you, Alan. Appreciate that. So to conclude, commissioners, the plan before you outlines a strategy to quickly and comprehensively address the greatest needs throughout the community. The plan reflects a balance between Leon County's continued efforts to provide citizens with immediate support relief and an intentional focus on recovery. It also positions the county to look forward and anticipate future needs specific to COVID-19 that may arise later in the year due to second waves of the virus, hurricane season, and flu season, as I mentioned. The plan contemplates leveraging the county's existing partnerships with the local healthcare community, human services agencies, local business community to quickly respond and provide support and relief to our citizens. Upon your approval, commissioners, we will immediately begin the implementation of the Leon County CARES Plan to distribute this funding assistance throughout the community, again, as quickly as possible. And moving forward, I'll provide the board, again, as Alan just mentioned, with updates on a weekly basis on the county's progress in implementing the plan. As always, commissioners, I want to thank the board for your continued support throughout the pandemic. I should have mentioned when I talked about Andy Johnson and Nikki Payton and Chinton Lammy that Alan Rosenzweig has been our point on this project. And of course, he's been exceptional. I want to thank our county attorney. Her life is about to get even more interesting with all of the contracts and sub-grantee agreements that we'll be doing, and she's already stepped way up. And again, huge kudos to our staff for their tremendous work in developing a $51 million plan with extensive input from our community partners in such a short period of time. We recognize, commissioners, that now the work begins. And of course, I want to thank our citizens and community partners and the business community for their support and the valuable feedback that they provided to us throughout this process. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to answer any questions commissioners might have. And we have all of our staff also available, commissioners, if you have individual questions that fell into certain categories. All the right people are on deck to help provide the answers to those questions. We're recommending options 1 through 5. And Mr. Chairman, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you. Commissioners, I've got Commissioner Maddox on deck. Commissioner Maddox, and then Commissioner Lindley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I want to thank staff for this presentation, for what they put together for us to start from in regards to the CARES Act money that we received from the federal government by way of the state. Very proud of the product. Look forward to having this discussion on it. There's one thing though that I did want to bring up and see if we can get to, if I can get some support on, and that is the idea of a microloan program. And so I'm going to throw it out there. I know we'll probably need to approve everything, but what I'm thinking, Mr. Chair, you tell me if you want to handle it this way. Any additions, changes, moving around of this money, would you like for that to be done in a way of motions before we take it all up at once, or how would you like that?
My feeling would be, let's put something on the table, frankly, what's been presented as a starting point, and then we can pull that apart and as the discussion flows. In other words, in my opinion, if we decide to do something from a micro lending standpoint, for instance, maybe there'd be some swapping around or some direction we can give from there. That's my take. I'd rather hand them one package back that says, here's kind of our intent, unless you guys want to break it up. I don't know. Vince, that seems to make, I mean, you guys have put an immense amount of work into this, and it's a collective body.
Sure, and I think what Commissioner Maddox what was asking, just in terms of the flow and the discussion
Right.
from commissioners, how you'd like to address that. I think the floor is open for any
Okay.
motions, or
Yeah.
and certainly from our standpoint, we're very happy to answer questions that on any thoughts or ideas or
Right.
expansions or contractions that the commissioners might have.
Yeah, so but from a logistics standpoint, it would be, why don't we put something on the table, Nick, instead of Commissioner Maddox, instead of starting down, a separate discussion about something, and then we can add to it and delete from it and use that as kind of a jumping off point. So, if that makes sense.
I'll tell you what, it does, but I have a motion, but it's not staff recommendation. I'm going to throw it out there to see if I'll get a second. If I don't, then we can go with the way that you like to have it done, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
The motion that I'm asking for, and this is specific to the microloan program, it would be fit under the business portion of the CARES program, and will require some moving around there. But the motion is, I want to make a motion that we allocate $7.5 million to the CARES Act dollars to FAMU Credit Union for the purpose of providing microloans to Black-owned businesses. That a policy committee be established to include the president of Big Bend Minority Chamber, the president of Capital City Chamber, and FAMU SBDC appointee, and two appointees or two additional chair seats for a major corporation who donates to the fund. Mr. Chair, the policy committee will set the policy and implementation program to provide the loans prior to the December 30th deadline. And that policy committee will also work with OEB to leverage, and this is the important part, to leverage that $7.5 million to raise an additional $25 million to expand the program far beyond December 30th, 2020. I would like to use OEV to have that program to provide oversight for that program as promulgated by the city and the county. Mr. Chair, that's my motion. It's in line with us. Just basically the basic idea to it is taking $7.5 million, leveraging that 7.5 to bring in another 25, using our minority chambers to help us do that, along with FAMU SBDC, as well as trying to find a couple more businesses that's willing to invest in the fund to be on the board, and even throwing OEV in there to be the oversight. Mr. Chair, that would be my motion. I know the staff has given us a program with pretty much everything but 10 million allocated, but I feel like if we put our heads together, we can move some money around and make this happen. Mr. Chair, that's my motion. Thank you.
Okay. Do we have a second? I've got Commissioner Dozier and then Commissioner Lindley, then Dozier, then Minor. But is there a second? I think it's worth the discussion. I'm not going to second it for now, but I think it's a discussion I'd like to have. Commissioner Lindley, you're up next, then Dozier, then Minor. Commissioner Lindley.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I would really prefer right now to make a motion for options 1 through 5 and possibly have a separate discussion on a microloan. I mean, that's sort of come out of the blue, although I did get a call about such a project last night using the small business money. And I just rather discuss that at a second separately from what we're doing now and make the motion for 1 through 5. I guess that would be a substitute motion, or did you get a second on?
No, there was no, Commissioner Maddox has died for lack of a second. So is there a second for Commissioner Lindley's?
I will second that for discussion.
Okay.
May have additional amendment,
fine.
as always. Thank you. Yeah.
I just
Floor
wanted to get it
still-
on the table. I have some comments on that too.
Sure. Floor's still yours, Commissioner Lindley. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, a couple of things come. One, I mean, this is all just, I'm sure there are going to be people around the county exhaling to find that this availability of some money in mostly small amounts, but I think meaningful amounts to individuals and small businesses. It's tremendous. And thank you for a great work on this. I was just interested in how, particularly, I've gotten some requests from the Tallahassee Urban League to help get the word out on the individual assistance program. In particular, it's a HUD agency and feels it could do a good job of getting the word out for the individual assistance for utility, rent, and mortgage payments. So I guess in line with that, I was just wondering, I know Matt and our public information team will do a great job of getting the word out, but are we going to enlist community partners to be sure that they can touch base with individuals who might not be online all the time, or how are we going to get the word out to individuals who could really use these individual grants? That's that 7.5 million. So that was,
Yes, the answer is yes. We're going to be using the community partners, and specifically we're aware of the interest that the Urban League has expressed, and we'll be following up with them specifically, but many more, because we're going to need that help in getting it out. Again, the timeline is such that we're going to need as much help as we can get, and you can be rest assured that we'll be fully utilizing every available partner to do so.
okay,
All right.
that's really my concern right now, so I appreciate that. On my way back in later. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Lindley. Commissioner Dozier, followed by Commissioner Minor.
Sorry about that, Mr. Chair. Thank you. We've said it a number of times, remarkable work product on behalf of our county administrative team, all our departments, legal, and a lot of partners. And I'm not sure, Mr. County Administrator, if you or Alan had said this, but we got the announcement from the governor on June 10th. So
Right.
The agenda was released on July 7th. It's about a month. And this is, frankly, what I'd expect from our staff, and Alan and Andy and Heather in the lead. That's fantastic. So, Mr. Chair, I do have a number of different questions, and we could break these into sections if you want. We're kind of talking about the business section right now. I would actually like to circle back after we get through this part to talk about testing and contact tracing.
Sure.
Would that work for you, so we can kind of
Yeah.
keep the conversation
Yeah.
flowing? Okay,
That's fine.
perfect. So I guess generally, I really like the categories as well. I think that's a very logical and broad-based approach. I mean, we got to keep everything moving forward right now. So having public safety and government, small business, human services, and the contingency, all of that was really, I think, well done. And we, Mr. County Administrator, I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm not sure we had to put these percentages in these different categories. That was kind of, okay, that was kind of our choice, and I'm really glad with the breakdown, because we need both public and private sector and nonprofits supported. To the microloan program, I have been asked this question as well, and have had really good long conversation last night. And Ms. County Administrator, you and I talked about it during briefing yesterday. So I don't want to leave it as just on the table without a second, and wouldn't mind going back there for a second. What you had mentioned was, because the money had to be spent by December 31st, and because any loans that would be awarded through the CARES Act, that's going to take a little time to process. Then those, when they're paid back to the county, we have to return that money to the federal government. Is that right?
That's right. So Mr. Chairman and Commissioner Dozier, if you don't mind. So just a couple of things to keep in mind. Always the first hurdle, can this funding be utilized for micro lending? The answer is yes. However, and we considered that in the development of this plan. We considered it rather closely, but it was very persuasive to us the fact that, and I think to many other counties, that the federal government has about $130 billion worth of PPP loans still available out there. Now, keep in mind, these are forgivable loans. And as you mentioned, Commissioner Dozier, any loan that is made available to a borrower, the payments on that loan received after December 30th must go back to the Treasury as it's currently written. So again, we ostensibly have the ability, notwithstanding the leveraging aspect and the intent to get private sector dollars that Commissioner Maddox talked about, but you could ostensibly make the same number of grants as you could loans. And so that's why we put that emphasis on grants and not loans. And again, a major driving factor for that is the availability of PPP forgivable loans, which even if they're not forgivable, are at much better rates than anything that we've seen in other programs. So that's the major logic going to that.
And let me expand. I've got something on point, Commissioner Dozier. So if after the end of the year and you've got a micro loan, we would end up having to collect that and turn around and flip it out to the Treasury.
That's correct.
Okay, which would not be an easy transaction and would be, okay. It's confusing about how the money flows versus hand somebody some money, hopefully plug a hole. Okay, all right. Your floor is still yours, Commissioner Dozier. Yeah.
Thank you. So, Mr. County Administrator, I appreciate that, and Mr. Chair, thank you for that addition. I think one of the things that's really hit home for me was getting our arms wrapped around this in a month, and our staff is already prepared to execute these agreements and move forward as quickly as possible. They've got preliminary approval from the state. So they have been working double time to be able to get this money out into the community as quickly as possible. We all think we can spend a lot of money really quick, but it can be difficult sometimes. I mean, there's some big allocations, so it's going to take some work for some folks. You had said, Mr. County Administrator, that we could do the same number of grants as loans, and that was something I picked up from Commissioner Maddox's motion. If we were going to put $7.5 million into a loan program, we would have to take it out of one of the other programs. There's no additional funding coming down or anything like that. So we would have to start adjusting these numbers for other programs. Is that correct?
That's correct, or the replenishment reserve account.
Or the reserve account, okay. So with that reserve account, that gives us other options in October, but I believe that is a good thing to have right now. I'm not sure you said it in your presentation. Forgive me if I missed it. You said it yesterday. We need to see which programs work and which don't, and we might need to replenish certain loans. So with the loan program, I guess one last thing I'm not really clear about, if someone was to pay back a loan before December 31st, that might be able to be put back into the fund, granted again, but it gets really complicated with the repayments and everything after December 31st. Any loans existing at that point, that's what has to go directly to the federal government.
Now, what you said is accurate, yes.
Okay. And it would probably increase cost for compliance and tracking and other things like that, or the application process, things like that. There would have to be another component there that we don't already have built in.
Correct.
Okay. Mr. Chair, I know I'm spending a little bit of time on this point, but microloans have really come up in conversation a good bit lately. And I hope you'll forgive me, but I'm struggling a little bit to keep, I mean, nothing's separate, to keep this conversation separate from the OEV conversation. Commissioner Maddox, you just mentioned OEV kind of helping the committee you suggested with the credit union. We all know about our conversation last week. I've shared my concerns pretty well last week, but I want to come back to it because if the federal government, Economic Development Administration, awards Appalachian Regional Planning Council and OEV $1 million revolving loan fund, it is a bit different than a microloan fund, but it is easier access to capital for those who cannot get access to capital or have a struggle doing that. I've sat in those committees, and I think I shared this with the county administrator. I would love to see a list of other programs and resources, whether it's in the Ernst & Young website or whatever that might be. Should we get the RLF program? That's something that could help right now. And we want to make sure our chambers and everyone else can point people in that direction. I also think it's really important for us to come back in our next OEV discussion and talk about how much of an impact we can make on the community with different types of funding. A microloan program could have an incredible return on that investment for businesses and individuals over multiple years. And we got a lot of good choices or good projects on the table. I'm not sure they all get the biggest bang for our buck out of OEV. So I know I spent a moment on that, but we are doing our best with emergency relief funds. And I think that these grants are the right posture for CARES, but I don't want us to forget we have other options in the next 2 months for short, medium, and long-term impact that we should look at. So moving on from that, thank you, Mr. County Administrator. I've gotten some questions about the PPP loans. I know they're forgivable. There's 130 billion left, and they might re-up some more. Are we still assisting or helping our chambers assist businesses have access to those funds, apply for them, and particularly when it comes to minority and women-owned businesses that may have been dramatically left out of the first round of PPP? Are we helping and fielding questions?
Yes, very actively so. And our partners continue to, and that's happening at OEV, and our partners, and specifically at FAMU SBC are doing a very good job there as well.
And if someone applied for a PPP loan in this last allotment, are they prevented from applying again or increasing that amount?
No, they can apply again.
Okay. A couple of businesses asked questions about when a new installment's coming in. I think it would be in our benefit or in our community's benefit to remind everyone there's still money available and really push out those resources from the chambers and others and OEV, SBDC, who've been phenomenal to help them apply for those existing dollars. Sorry, Mr. Chair, I'm looking back up here. I'm going to save again the testing and everything for later. So the only other thing I wanted to mention was the human service category. Just can't say enough about Second Harvest and now adding to their list that they will help administer these funds. Commissioner Minor, you know better than any of us what that is going to entail. But whether it's Second Harvest, Early Learning Coalition, our housing groups, is just phenomenal. And similar to the PPP program, I hope we can add the state's rent mortgage assistance program to our list of resources. We just want people to access as much money as possible. And the last note I have on this is about the child care. Mr. County Administrator, you said the state was helping essential workers and first responders. That category of essential workers, I'm guessing, is different than those folks who were deemed essential during shutdown, meaning can a grocery store, someone who works there, access those dollars for childcare or not from the state program?
Yes, in fact, and the distinction being under our program, and sorry about that, you broke up a little bit there on the audio, but in our program under CARES, the essential worker definition is expanded under the CARES Act to include additional types of occupations, as you mentioned, grocery store workers, retail workers, support staff in healthcare facilities, and that sort of thing.
So thank you for letting me know I broke up there. So those folks do not qualify under the existing state funding for childcare. That's for first responders and others, but the category will be expanded under CARES, but only for those families that qualify through Early Learning Coalition. Is that correct?
That's correct. That is correct, yes.
Mr. Chair, I know we're going to get a deep dive, thank you, Ms. County Administrator, on all of this come October. Childcare is one of the biggest things I'm concerned about on this list of not having enough funding. I understand the funding available meets or exceeds the waiting list currently for ELC, but if businesses start to reopen, we could see this getting a bit tighter for families. So this is one area I really want to keep track of with ELC, Whole Child, others, make sure we're meeting the needs, particularly for those essential workers.
Good question. Okay.
So yeah, there's a whole lot of stuff we could talk about. I've hit my high level questions. Thank you very much. And I look forward to talking about the testing piece in a little while. Thank you all.
Perfect. Thanks. Okay. Commissioner Minor, followed by Commissioner Maddox.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hitting on a bunch of different things here. When Commissioner Maddox mentioned the microloan program, I like the concept, and I think that we need to have a bigger discussion about this. As we all know, African Americans are disproportionately affected by the pandemic in terms of health, but also in economic terms too. And I joined Commissioner Maddox in wanting to have a deeper discussion about this in the coming weeks and months. I'm not convinced that the CARES Act is the right mechanism for a microloan program for the reasons that we already talked about. You repay the loan. If we can't disperse that before, some of those funds will go back to the Treasury. I think with the Small Business Assistance Program, we can get a lot of that assistance to these businesses in the form of a grant. And so that's where my thinking is on that. But I do want to springboard off of what Commissioner Maddox said. We need to have a bigger discussion about the economic disparity that is growing in this county. That's bigger since the pandemic started. And I think we need to have that discussion sooner rather than later. Regarding contact tracing, I was really pleased to see the funds to provide for an additional 600 case contacts and almost 2,000 contact tracing contacts, which is great. I've got a question for Claudia, if she doesn't mind. Well, actually, a question for the county administrator first. If we get to the point where the number of cases, the percent positivity of COVID cases here increases, and we decide that we need more contact tracing funding, we could just simply take that from a replenishment account. You don't need to wait for us. You just simply make the call and then provide those funds to Leon County Health Department. Is that correct?
That's not the way that we have it contemplated. Certainly, we could structure it that way, but the way we have it contemplated, and we think it works, would be any reallocation would come from the board. Any reallocation of the dollars under the way it's currently proposed, and we think the timing is right for October, giving the dollars that we have available to us. Reallocation from the reserve account into programs or from one program to another. I'd be coming back to the board for that. But rest assured, Commissioner Minor, if we get into that situation and it becomes a matter of urgency, I'll coordinate with the chairman on that and about getting board direction to do something like that.
That sounds good. So long as you're comfortable with that, so long as Claudia is comfortable with that, I think that's a good approach. I'll defer to you on that. My main thing is, down in South Florida, people have been talking about how they've got contact testing capacity down there about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and now they're overrun. Part of that is because the positivity is so high now that the benefit of contact tracing is diminished anyway. But I just want to make sure that that you and Claudia, Leon County Department of Health, have the funds to stay ahead of the curve. So.
And Commissioner Meyer, let me, if I could, just add on to that too. The answer that I gave you was correct, but I also just want to remind you that within that category, we have a $3 million reserve account.
Okay.
So again, we could go there and not miss a beat.
Great. All right. Thank you very much. Next item, like Commissioner Lindley, I wanted to bring up the Tallahassee Urban League and making sure that we're working with them as a partner to help out with the increasing public awareness of the opportunity for mortgage and rent assistance. They know a lot of people on the ground in the field, so I think working with them will be very important. Glad to hear that we're going to be doing that. On the next item, on the local human services assistance, the $2 million, that was grants of up to $20,000 per nonprofit organizations, correct?
That's correct.
Do you think that threshold is high enough for some applicants? That I wouldn't want to have some programs that are eligible, that are worthwhile, not be brought forth and not being carried through because the expense is too high, above the $20,000. So that is a hard $20,000 max for each grant dispersal, right?
It is. The only thing I can say about that, Commissioner, is that the intent there, we worked with UPHS, who helped us determine what the amount of money would be there, and the intent would be to that really this pandemic has impacted organizations across the board, and the intent was to try to get that level of assistance to as many agencies as we could.
Okay, sounds good. And it is up to 20,000, right? It's
That's
not fixed. It's up to.
That's correct.
Okay. So theoretically, you could have more than 100 local human services organizations receive funding.
That's correct.
Okay. Okay, great. And then the last thing was on Second Harvest. As you all know, I was working at Second Harvest up until about a year ago, but I still don't know the people there. They're doing a great job. You all have seen the video on the news of the long lines in other cities, and that's affecting us here in Tallahassee too. People waiting in line to get some food to take home to their families. I did a little bit of number crunching using Second Harvest numbers in the attachment that we were provided, and food insecurity has decreased over the last 2 years, thanks to Second Harvest and others. I mean, for the first time in many years, we had seen a decrease in food insecurity in Leon County, which was something we had celebrated. But since the pandemic started, just in the last 4 or 5 months, we've seen food insecurity increase in Leon County by 44%. To the point now we have 27.5% of every adult in Leon County, of the adult population, is food insecure. 30% of the children in Leon County are food insecure now because of COVID. That's almost a third of the kids in this county are now food insecure. So I was really happy to see the funding going into Second Harvest. I know the folks, they're doing a great job. They work with 135 other agencies to get food to people that need it. Really like the idea of Second Harvest increasing the number of mobile pantries from 3 a month to now 9 a month here in Leon County. That's a big deal. So very happy to see that. As you all know, food insecurity is one of the terrible effects that we're seeing with COVID, and this funding will go far to help out a lot of people. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'm done.
Thank you, Commissioner Minor. Commissioner Maddox.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just real quick. So, Mr. Administrator, if the motion passes as is, there is no room to have a conversation afterwards about allocating more money because this motion allocates those dollars, correct?
Correct. This motion would approve the plan and allocate the dollars, and we'd be back to you in October to make moves within the program. But you're right, now would be the time, again, if there was additional program components that the board wished to add, now would be the time to do.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. Mr. Chair, I appreciate, again, what staff has put together, but I do believe that there is a strong need here for the microloan program that I placed out front during my initial comments. I know right now Commissioner Lindley has made the motion for 1 through 5 and kind of controls the motion as is. I'm wondering if she will go down the road, as we do all know that we have that 10 million in reserves, of at least allocating 3 of that 10 million to take us down to 7 for reserves to the microloan program that I mentioned earlier. I do understand that, you know, after the 3rd and 5th is complicated to where about the back and forth of that money going back to the Treasury, but quite frankly, I think we can figure that piece out. And the effect that it will have, especially if we're able to leverage even 10 to 15 million back to our community, the effect it can have on Black-owned businesses is legacy and life-changing for our community. I mean, we talk so much about the poorest areas in our community and how much those folks need help. I don't believe there's any better way to help them than putting money into Black-owned businesses, which will hire in those communities, within our community, to help those folks out. And so I'm going to start by asking Commissioner Lindley if she would consider amending her motion to include 3 million of the $10 million reserve to go towards the microloan program that I mentioned earlier with all the stipulations included.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. I wonder if it's possible to instead just request an agenda item for us to consider that $10 million amount in our October meeting. So I just feel inadequate to even understand exactly how the microloan program would work right now. So I'm just reluctant to take it in and just say, now let's go ahead and take it out of that 10 million at this point. So I appreciate the overall spirit of it. I do. And maybe that's what the 10 million or a portion of it could be used for later. I'm just wondering, as a practical matter, could we try to just do an agenda item later for our next meeting, or even
Commissioner Minor, you wanted to add to this? You had conversation.
Thank you, Mr.
Yes.
Chair. I support the idea of a microloan program. I've had discussions about it with folks in the community. I'm not sure that the CARES Act is the best way for us to fund it, because we're at risk for losing those dollars back to the U.S. Treasury. And I want to get every single dollar of CARES Act funding allocated to Leon County brought to Leon County to stay. And so what I would rather propose, Commissioner Maddox, and we can talk about this, and I would support an agenda item coming back to us about using economic development sales tax dollars for the microloan program. That's money that we're going to have coming into Leon County that stays in Leon County after the loans have been paid off. I think that, in my personal opinion, I think that's a better funding mechanism for it, because we won't be at risk for losing any dollars to the Treasury with that type of approach.
Let me weigh in real quick too, because I haven't said anything, but let me the conversation which Commissioner Lindley started, which we talked a little bit about micro lending, has been echoed. Commissioner Maddox, Commissioner Dozier, now Commissioner Minor, pretty much everybody would like to figure out how we do that. I think I agree with Commissioner Minor that the CARES Act is not the most appropriate vehicle for that. We've got a limited amount of time, a big tranche of money. I'm curious, could we potentially use some of that money as the catalyst, not to lend, but to help the PPP money get out, or to help, is there a way we could use that? Because as was pointed out, how do we get the word out to everybody? How do we make sure everybody knows what's out there? When we start lending money out of this CARES Act, I think we start crossing all sorts of boundaries. And I'm real hesitant as an entity for us to be considered a lender. I think that, by frankly, getting Ernst & Young on board was a great idea, because it gives us some accountability, and it gives us a buffer between us and how all this money flows. And I'm interested in pursuing this. As Commissioner Minor pointed out, I think in the CARES Act specifically, it's wrought with problems. And I think we've got a shot and a moment in time but I think Commissioner Maddox is onto something. Is there a way we can do this? And maybe the CARES Act is a catalyst for that. I don't know. I'm just grasping at straws here a little bit, looking for some avenue that we might take some of that money, not to lend, but to perpetuate that type of program. And frankly, the PPP money is also a loan of some sorts. And a lot of people are out there that are not aware of that's an available source of income or source of funds. I mean, is there a way for us to use some of the CARES money to promote getting the PPP money?
Well, Mr. Chairman, thank you. A couple things. Let me just reiterate that we, in all the analysis that was conducted, we gave considerable thought and analysis to micro lending, and again, made a decision again at that point not to make that recommendation in the interest of something Commissioner Minor said, which really was to make these dollars go as far as possible. I'll just repeat, PPP loans, there are $130 billion available. Those are forgivable loans. Those are at the most competitive interest rates that you'll find as compared to any microloan program. The dollars that have to go back after December 30th are important. I would just offer two, if it was if the goal two is to target minority businesses in particular, another place the board could go, if you so choose, is in the grant. Again, we don't have to pay these back, but in the grant category for small businesses, you could increase that minority incentive that's right now at $500, should you choose to do that. I just offer that as another place the board might wish to go.
All right. Commissioner Lindley, the floor is still your, oh, actually, yeah, you were answering Commissioner Maddox's question. I want to go back to where we were on this. Yeah. So Commissioner Lindley, it's yours,
Yeah.
and then back to Commissioner Maddox. Yeah.
Well, I mean, in answer to the question, I just think there are too many questions for me on the microloan. So I would say I would not want to amend my original motion, Commissioner Maddox. And if we could, find another avenue separately so we can really discuss it. I would like to know what the demand is for the microloans. I understand it in theory, but are we actually getting, what is the interest level and the concern and the numbers? I just feel the need for so much more information on that. So I would say I don't want to amend my motion at this time.
Thank you. I think what I'll do here then, it seems like, what I don't want to do is I don't want to put it out there for right now. I don't think it has the, if I made a substitute motion, I don't believe it would have votes here for us to push forward with it. And so what I'd like to do, Mr. Chair, if you'll come, but it does seem like there's a willingness here to have the conversation, maybe an agenda item on what it would look like, how it would look, and how we would move forward. And so, Mr. Chair, what you'll do, if you'll come back to me after we finish this item, what I'm prepared to do is to make a motion for us to bring back an agenda item looking at the possibility of the microloan program that I put forth earlier, and looking at possible funding resources for that loan program. Here's the bottom line of it. Not just minority, but especially Black-owned businesses really need this type of lift within our community, not just the ones that existed, but those who are right now in people's minds of creation. It would change neighborhoods within our community that we have that we're trying to affect the most. And so I'm not going to give up on it. I'm going to keep pushing on it. But maybe if this isn't the right place for us to push, if I can't get the support here, then I'm definitely willing to take a step back, get that agenda item, have staff give us different options on how we can fund it at an adequate level to a place where we can bring down some big leveraging dollars. I mean, the point here is not just to spend the $3 million or the $7 million or whatever we allocate, but to leverage those dollars to bring another 10 to 15 in, or even 20 in, so that money continues to rotate through our community and grow. So, Mr. Chair, if you'll come back to me, I'll make that motion after we dispense of the business here as far as the CARES money is concerned. Thank you.
Well, will do, Commissioner Maddox. Good comments. All right, I've got Commissioner Dozier followed by Commissioner Proctor. Commissioner Dozier.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Maddox, I will second your motion when you make it. I'm sure a lot of us would. We need to dig into this. But let me reiterate my point earlier. There are a lot of things we could do with funding, but there is a question about what is the biggest impact for the dollars that we have given the strings attached by others. Access to capital and generational wealth are two of the major issues when we talk about institutional racism and economic inequality in our country. We needed a microloan program before March. We need it even more now. Like I said, the revolving loan fund is a little different than microlending, but it has helped a lot of minority and women-owned businesses in other counties, and we could get and Leon's never had access to it. So if we want more than a 6-month microloan program, Commissioner Maddox, what you just said was this could help neighborhoods, this could help individuals, this could help really lift up a lot of people. I think that's more than a 6-month microloan program. And short-term stimulus, emergency funds, it could come in the way of loans, and some businesses could pay it back within a few months, certainly. But I hope that in your motion, you're willing to, I think you said this before, look at other funding sources, like our whole range of options. We have to get creative with this. And we have to do it as quickly as possible. So I completely agree with that. I feel so strongly about microlending and revolving loan that I think it should be more than 6 months. I'm going to leave it there. Mr. Chair, Commissioner Minor mentioned something about testing, contact tracing, other things like that. I still had some questions there. Would you like me to move back to that point now? It sounds like we're kind of getting to the end.
If you want, yeah, if you want to, go ahead, Commissioner Dozier. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so a little different sidestep here. Commissioner Minor, I really appreciate the comments that he made about contact tracing. Ms. County Administrator or Claudia, if she's still with us, in the item it says the CARES funding will support 4 dedicated teams of contact tracers. How many staff does that include? Is that 4 individuals? Are there multiple people on teams? It notes 600 cases a week, 1,900 contacts. I'm just wondering how many positions does that fund?
That question, Commissioner Dozier, that funds about 40 people, 4 contact tracers, 2 investigators, a lead nurse, an epidemiologist. And we expect each team to have expertise in different areas and also to help us with outbreak investigations, especially with the long-term care facilities.
Okay, that's fantastic. I was hoping it wasn't going to be 4. I couldn't imagine you could accomplish that amount of work with 4 people. This is an interesting moment because we're going to come back to a commission meeting later today. We're going to get a COVID update, and a lot of the questions that I have, Mr. Chair, I'm going to save for that time, but they certainly overlap. So I'm going to try to be more succinct right now. The testing increase, the funding for contact tracing, this only relates to those tests that are sanctioned by Florida Department of Health and are reported to the Florida Department of Health. It is, I'm wondering about contact tracing. I think you were trying to work with patients first, Claudia, and others to do contact tracing, but I'm wondering where we stand with contact tracing for all of the different types of testing going on in our community. And if you think there is a need to do contact tracing for testing that's happening in the private sector.
Sure. All COVID tests, negative or positive, are reported to the health department. And the antigen tests that are being done by Patients First and other places using a different technology are reported to the health department. And those are all considered cases, and we are investigating those cases just like any other case. So it's by law, all reports come to the health department.
Okay, well, forgive me, Mr. Chair. I mean, I could leave this question to later if you'd like to move forward. But Claudia, this sounds very different than what we've heard in the last few weeks. And I know this is a evolving process for everything. But I think about a month ago, there was no contract tracing required at Patients First, and they were not required to report their numbers. Is that correct? So this has changed?
No, they have always reported their numbers, but they were considered probable cases, and they weren't included in our case count. And it was up to us whether we investigated them or not. But things have changed since then, because I think the general consensus now is that are pretty accurate. I mean, there's no perfect test, but they're pretty accurate. And so we now consider them, they're still considered probable cases, but they're counted with all the other cases, and they're treated just like all the other cases. That happened in the last couple of weeks. And so you probably, if you've been looking at our numbers, you will see that the numbers changed historically because they added those cases.
Okay. I'm really glad I asked, because coming into this meeting, I'm sorry, the county administrator just grew a beard and got, sorry, Alan.
Got way better looking is what I heard.
There you go. So Claudia, when I was reading through this, I was still under the impression that we were leaving out a big chunk of the probable cases from those private sector and not tracing as much. So I am thrilled to hear that that has changed in the last couple of weeks. I know this is not something that you necessarily had control over. So I'm just going to say, I wish the state had taken these steps a long time ago, but I'm thrilled to hear that they're doing it now and that all the numbers are coming into the system now. Mr. Chair, I can save the rest of the questions for later. Forgive me. Is there anything we need to talk about related to testing and funding? I've heard about Mark O'Brien from TMH has talked about community testing capacity increasing at TMH soon. I think part of the partnership with FSU. Is there anything else that we could do to increase testing in our community and support those efforts?
So I think that this proposal really covers that issue, that the partnership with federally qualified health centers, health department, we have plans to increase testing. And I also understand, and Kevin Peters could probably talk more about this, there is going to be another site opening in the near future that will increase community capacity.
Forgive me if I wasn't clear about that. My understanding is there's still the volume of testings, there's delay on results sometimes, things like that. Hopefully the increased capacity will solve some of that. But I thought what TMH was working on, being able to run those tests here locally, based on what Mark O'Brien said publicly during a Village Square discussion, it sounded like that would dramatically increase our capacity, but also the speed at which those tests were conducted. And so that is still separate than the other capacity you're adding?
Yes, I mean, I'm just talking about the capacity that's addressed in the proposal with the federally qualified health centers and the health department. But yes, that will increase capacity, and I know that will help with the university testing as well. Part of the capacity issue, as you said, is the labs get overwhelmed nationally, and that's where we start running into delays. Right now, we're doing pretty well at Bragg. The lab that we're working with has a pretty good turnaround time, a few days. But it changes over time depending on the volume that they're faced with. So
And
yes,
that is not a, I'm sorry, go ahead.
so local testing, the ability to do the test locally is very good. But even with that, I mean, I know that there are reagent issues from time to time. There are shortages, and so you try to find multiple ways to do the testing so that you can always get those priority tests done.
Thank you. Mr. County Administrator or whoever might sit down in the chair at this point. Ah, there we go. I would like to better understand, as FSU adds their capacity, where we are, and I think I'm getting out of our lane here, but if there was anything we could do to help with reagents and others, every report I'm reading, everything we're seeing, I mean, it's testing and contact tracing. It is the knowledge base that will help us drive decisions in the future and control the spread. And if there are additional ways that we can boost that, I mean, FSU built a lab out at Innovation Park to run their tests. These are fantastic. So I would like to know more about that and see if we could help those efforts. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Great. Claudia, before you go, I wanted to ask a follow-up question, and I've got Commissioner Proctor next. I've got friends who are getting tests from a private standpoint, not from a lab, not from a testing center. They've got access to the drug companies. I don't see any way those are reported, though, right? So there's some tests that obviously we can't see factored into our overall counts. Am I right?
By law, those are reported.
Oh, really? Okay.
For instance, if you're referring to like where you get the kit in the mail and you do it yourself at home and send it in.
Well, in this case, they're drug reps that say, hey, I have access, I don't understand, and they're buying 50 or 100 at a clip and then using them for their families and things.
Well, it should be reported. So.
Okay. Okay, cool. Okay, thank you. All right, Commissioner Proctor, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, commissioners. Thank you all for your capacities to proceed even without me in the budget workshop today. As I looked at the New York Times on yesterday, I have a copy here in my hand, and over in the right column, it indicates that 15,000 new cases in Florida in a day breaks a record, surpassing New York. And when I look at our allocations this morning and the platitudes to our staff for the outstanding work, I trusted that protocol of compliments to our staff have already been established. So I will bypass that. But let me look at the $1 million that have been allocated for bond, health, neighborhood, North Florida medical centers in Appalachia. We have only $1 million. And New York Times is suggesting that Florida has bypassed even New York's record for a one-day total. Ms. Blackburn just gave us an update and suggested that our numbers are still at a riotous effort. I'm very appreciative that a good judge, Judge Cooper, appreciated our stance with a mask, and that our legal staff was supported by the judge and our board's actions to have an indoor mask protection. What I'm trying to say is that this complement of medical providers is absolutely doing a Herculean job. I would suggest if the county commissioners, if we have any creative capacity to shape this $51 million, or if not, if our job, Mr. Chairman, is simply to rubber stamp what we see and make no offerings, then I'll keep my brain cells on lock. And let me just ask that, are we allowed to make any recommendations? Or are we just here to say yay and nay?
It's the will of the board, Commissioner.
It's my idea that we should not give the city of Tallahassee $5 million. And I would suggest that we give the city of Tallahassee, and not clear why we are even gifting them with anything, but if we are to gift the city of Tallahassee with $5 million, I would suggest that we take 2 million of that and give to the frontline players an additional $2 million. And it's my understanding that once we expand it from the boutique drive up doctor anointed and appointed at the Northwood Mall Center, that we're at 500. When I passed by Bragg on yesterday, there was a sign at the driveway by the ROTC building that said, "We are at capacity. We are full. We are done for the day." And it was not at the end of the day. They were already done. I think that we're getting more bang for the buck. We're meeting the moment, and we're actually meeting the very disease for which generates and has given rise for all of this money. I would like to suggest, Mr. Chairman, that we do $2 million from the city's money, because the city has a lot of capacity to raise money, but Bond and Neighborhood, Appalachia have been out there on the front line. I'd like to ask this board if we're allowed to dream additionally with our staff that we would take $2 million additionally and give to each of those entities, which would bring close about $1 million to each one of them. Also, Mr. Chairman, that next category of individual, community, and small business, I did not get a definition that our largest amount is to individual assistance. And I have not fully understood and would appreciate knowing what does an individual, does that mean? That citizens of District 1, particular individuals, what's an individual assistant? I don't know. And can I get some leeway of understanding?
Sure.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner, two programs. We've got the small business assistance program. We'll explain that. But on the individual assistance, Commissioner Proctor, we've got $7.5 million identified for that program, where it would be citizens throughout the county, whether you're a resident of the city or the unincorporated area county, would be eligible based on income to receive up to $3,000 for rent, mortgage assistance, or utilities. That's estimated based on what families are paying based on the means testing. The eligibility criteria would be about 3 months worth of rent payments. But again, it's for up to 3,000 individuals, and that's what it would be geared toward.
Okay, so that would be based on income specific. So we're talking about low income or Title I type, Title I school type parents and stuff like that. Is there a cap? How do we understand who qualifies is what I'm suggesting.
HUD standards.
Yes, we would utilize the HUD standard of 80% of AMI, the average median income, for that program. And we've got I believe we've got a table in the analysis that breaks that down based on how many family members would be in a family and that sort of thing. But it would be the same guideline utilized for much of our other programs targeting that population.
All right, my calculator is working right. At $3,000 per family, at up to 3,000, that would take care of 2,500, potentially 2,500 persons. And that's not a loan, that's an assistance. Is that accurate? That's not a loan program.
That's a grant.
Okay. I really know that we could gnaw on that bone for a little while in that category. But I also think, commissioners, that when I look at homelessness support of the $1 million, I don't know if that's for the providers of homelessness, such as Mr. Kearney. Are we reimbursing him? Or does that go to the basic guy who's sitting on a bench down on Monroe Street, wrapped up in a blanket at night? Are we giving assistance to the homeless persons? Are we putting food cards? How do you dream that, the homelessness support? And does it go directly to the homeless, or does it go to those who provide shelter to the homeless?
So, Commissioner Proctor, in trying to identify what the need was and the potential best use for these dollars, we engaged with our homelessness task force, which represents the spectrum of providers, understanding that there's a lot more dollars that are being expended currently for congregate and non-congregate care as individuals, homeless individuals move from the non-congregate settings in hotel rooms, et cetera, back into these facilities, where they told us the need was for us to assist them in providing funding for the ability to make modification to their physical spaces. And that would be dollars for the Kearney Center, Capital Area Youth Services, the Refuge House, and the Hope Community. And again, we're talking about think barriers, HVAC systems, et cetera, and that's where they told us the need would be. Again, any expense that is FEMA eligible, which many of those are, we're directing through FEMA first before coming to these dollars. So that's the big idea around that, and the entire homeless coalition is very supportive of the recommendation.
Okay, when I look at this budget item, commissioners, I see we have $1 million designated for the homeless support, and we have merely $100,000 for mental health support. I believe small business grants, which we're at 6 million, I really believe we should cut that to 5 million. And the reason I say that, we have already made a round and a half to our small business community previously. It's not like we've not attempted to do something already. And we've gone out on the street with $2 million previously. And I think that when you're looking at, as I look at this, I would group homeless support and mental health as the same category, the same people, the same urgencies. And unless I've misunderstood something about homelessness, I would recognize that the mental health support is insufficient to the need. And I know that frequently, every chance we get, we talk about mental health, mental health, mental health. We have this opportunity to bring mental health and really jumpstart this. And I would like to see commissioners and to ask y'all support in response to putting more money in mental health, at least to $500,000 to support and undergird homelessness, because, well, you already know there are issues there in homelessness and mental health. They go together. And I think that we're only making a pittance of and I'm glad that we're feigning to help, but we're not, and we have a chance to do more. And as Commissioner Dozier has said previously, this is a huge chance for us to really reflect our hearts as well as our heads. And I'm asking that we make that adjustment there. And then finally, I listened to Commissioner Maddox's concern, and I agree. And it's something about his ask for minority businesses and to create a microloan, which this moment gives that opportunity. And because it's a loan and not just a grant, it does not engender notions of dependency or notions of gift me, grant me, give me. It's a loan situation. We've attempted this before. Some years ago, Mr. Kenneth Barber brought such a program. We did it through FAMU Credit Union those years ago. And Vince, I thought that it was really successful, what we did and how we did. Now, as a Black man sitting here at this table with you all, it's amazing how we can see all of these approaches and all of these individuals and all of these groups. And what Commissioner Maddox and myself see, we see the lion's share of control over $51 million, which has never happened in my 2,000 years of serving here. We have never been in this moment to do so much good. But in every category that has been set forth, the actual control, decision-making, and all of that is in the hands of white people. Now, I heard someone say that Ernst and Young was a good decision. I'm not in the position to dispute that. But Ernst and Young having total oversight of what we're doing, and we need to have that. And I'm grateful that we have their expertise and experience. But I believe, and I don't want to take a chance, but someone said, one of my commissioners' colleagues said, how do you let everyone know about this money? And I'm real clear that Ernst and Young does not have the singular capacity to let everyone know. And it's just my hope that as we try to achieve equity in this round and disbursement, and there may be more money in the future, who knows, but we have to make every effort, as Commissioner Maddox has tried. And what he's saying is that for there to be equity and that this money actually meets, and that we create a category that meets the need of minority businesses that is not locked and caged within whatever small business grants are. I want, and when we come back to that, I want to make sure that everybody gets some money too. And I think that if we're not resistant to the word minority, or resistant to the word Black, and we're not resistant to these other categories, that we ought to be creative with $51 million, that we find a way to facilitate his ideas and thoughts. Those are my recommendations and thoughts, Commissioner. And I'd like to ask specifically now, how do I put into play the idea that we put $3 million supporting Vaughn, neighborhood, North Florida, and Appalachia, moving from one, and giving the city of Tallahassee, take $2 million from them and give it to those other groups, and to enlarge mental health support to $500,000, and that we're not throwing them I don't even know what $100,000 is of 51 million. I don't even know if it's 1 cent. No, but it ain't. In the big scheme of things, mental health needs more support. And I'm the father of a child who have mental disabilities. So when people like me and people like our state representative and people like Ms. Tant, who is running for a state representative, and the lady who's running for Osley is running for a state senator, all of us know about mental health because we deal with mental health. And just as a parent, I get a chance as a commissioner to say, this is the most measly amount on the sheet of paper. And can we do better as a parent? And speaking for the community of mental health, I'm asking y'all for some more money. How do I make that a formal request, Mr.
Commissioner Proctor, what you'd probably want to do is ask Commissioner Lindley if she'd be willing to amend. She's got the motion on the floor that walks through what the staff's recommendation was. If not, you could make a substitute motion.
That's my ask, Commissioner Lindley. Is there room under the canopy for my ask?
I think there's a lot going on in your motion. It might be better to just make a substitute motion rather than amend, because there's so many details that you've got in mind.
Okay, commissioners, may I, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, go ahead, Commissioner. You've got the floor. Yeah.
Commissioners, I think that we give a more comprehensive look to up the ante with mental health. I'm speaking and begging as a parent, as a father of mental health challenges and a son. And as we look at monies that we're allocating, I'm asking us to please, let's adjust for mental health support. I have not worked out, but I think that it comes from I'm asking for a motion now, a motion that places $3 million for supporting Bond neighborhood, North Florida and Appalachia, as they are out there. They are out there in the middle of the pandemic and all of those things, and that we take $5 million, give the city of Tallahassee $3 million, and give the $2 million that we reduce there to the frontline medical community. That's a part of it. And then on the mental health category, I'm asking that we take $500,000 from the small business grant and up the ante to mental health for $600,000, and that would leave the small business grants at 5.5, a group which we've already previously helped. And I look at that group not because I'm picking on them or don't like them, but I'm looking at that group because we have already previously served them. So it's, everybody wants to get a second and a third helping, but to an area that's not even got a first helping, I would make that as a part of my motion for now.
Okay, then we have a motion on the floor. Substitute motion, is there a second? All right, I do not see a second. I've got Commissioner Maddox, followed by Commissioner Minor, followed by Commissioner Dozier.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm gonna take one more swipe. It's different this time. Mr. Chair, you did.
Something happened to your audio. Yeah, go ahead.
My fault. Mr. Chair, you did. Mr. Administrator, you did mention earlier about. I know we're gonna have the agenda item for the microloan program, but you did mention earlier about maybe an increase in the minority bonuses within the grant program that we have. There's two ways I think we can get to this. We can either allocate a little more money towards that program and increase that subsidy or that bonus, or we could just increase the bonus, and then it would probably change the amount of businesses that we could help. Mr. Administrator, you also said that within the 10 million, about 3 million of that 10 was considered to be reserved, correct?
That's correct.
I can understand there being a little bit of hesitation here about going the whole 3, but what I'm looking here maybe if we could jump out there with maybe another 1.5 to increase the subsidy, because again, I understand people want to dig in a little more into the microloan program to understand it before we move in that direction. But the grant program seems to be pretty well laid out, and we've actually used it before, and I think we all understand it. And so maybe another 1.5 or to go towards the 6 million to make it that even 7.5 that we started out before paying off the 1.5 that we had previously granted, to go towards that the grant program and increasing the amount of bonus for minority businesses. I think right now it's 500, correct?
Correct.
To 1,500 within the stipulations of the bonuses for the grant. Commissioner Lindley, you are the maker of the motion. I'm wondering if you would entertain that as a amendment to your motion. What I would like, though, along with that, is for the lion's share, that 1.5, to be considered for the increase in the amount of bonuses for minority businesses, and then whatever's left over after that be considered for those businesses that are non-minority. So I'm looking to move in that direction. Or if you're more comfortable leaving that 1.5 in there, I just want to increase the bonus to minority businesses from 500 to 1,500. That is.
Go ahead, Commissioner Lindley. Yeah.
I'd go along with increasing the bonus to 1,500. I think that makes sense. I'd be happy. In fact, I thought 500 was not much of a bonus actually anyway. So to minority businesses, do we need to attach a specific number to that? I mean, I don't know where the 1.5 comes from. Are you just calculating the estimated number?
Well, I was the 1.5. If you remember, the total amount was 7.5. 1.5 was going back to pay back the monies that we used from the sales tax. And so I was just trying to take that number back from 6 to an even 7.5 is where it started, with the thought that that money would go to help even more businesses, but especially help with increasing the subsidy from that 500 to 1,000 for minority business.
Can we go ahead? I was just going to ask the administrator to weigh in maybe and give us a little bit of guidance on this, because it's moving. We're trying to solve a problem that
I'm
probably
definitely
you guys.
good with increasing the subsidy to 1,500. I think that's
Okay.
fine, however we can get there.
Yeah, no problem at all with that, and we could just take that. I think Commissioner Maddox said 1.5 million from the reserve account, and,
Okay.
and if that's the will of the board, we can do that, and to fund that program.
Okay.
Mr. Administrator, Mr. Chair, my question for the administrator is, I'm guessing that the 1.5 would be more though than what would be needed to accommodate, even if all, I guess, 400 or 500 businesses here in Leon County got the 1,500, correct?
We haven't done the math on that. We need to take a look at it,
Well,
but again,
Maybe you put
The
a
point-
cap of it, a cap of 1.5.
Yeah, I think if we put the cap at 1.5, it increased, like I said before, the place 1.5 came from was simply to get us back to 7.5 million for that program in particular. And so, I mean, just 1.5 being the cap, looking at those monies going to increase that bonus piece there, and then whatever we don't spend as a result of increasing the bonus piece. Mr. Chair, Mr. Administrator, if staff wants to put that back in reserve, I'm totally fine with it.
Do you understand?
we got it. We got it.
And Commissioner Lindley, you're okay with the kind of the genesis
Yeah,
of it?
I'm
Okay.
very happy to do that. Yeah, I think that's a good change, and speaks
who
to
Commissioner
the
Dozier,
equity issues that.
Okay, Commissioner Dozier, you were the second on this. Are you okay with those changes?
I think in general I am, but I needed some I've been trying to follow your conversation here, but I need some clarification on that 1.5 million.
Yeah, that's
So
a little vague for me.
this,
Okay.
yeah.
Why don't we let the administrator weigh in and articulate kind of what he thinks this is going, where this is going?
The way I understand it, commissioners, is that you would seek to increase the bonus for the MWBE businesses under the Small Business Assistance Grant Program to $1,500, and to ensure that we can do that and have a little extra money to accommodate that, to take 1.5 million from the $10 million reserve account to accomplish that. And so that is our understanding of the amendment to the motion.
Is that your intent, Commissioner Maddox?
That is indeed my intent. Again, Mr. Administrator, just a clarification, a maximum of 1.5, but those funds that aren't extended from that 1.5 to accommodate this will go right back into the reserve account is what my intent is as well.
Correct.
Perfect. Okay, so Commissioner Dozier, are you okay with the way the administrator articulated that? Since you're the second on the motion.
I am, Mr. Chair. I just picked a number randomly and did 500 businesses at 1,500, and that's about $750K or $1,000. So I just needed to wrap my minds around kind of how much we were talking about. I think the reserve account, like I said before, is very important because we may need more in small business grants in general, right? So Commissioner Maddox, I like the way you said the remainder goes back into the reserve account. That makes me feel a little better. And the last question I had was, these are not just businesses that are registered through MWSBE, or do they have to be registered through that program?
It needs to be either our program or the state.
Okay. We all know that there are some people who take advantage of those programs. This has been historic, and I think we've gotten a whole lot better locally at really supporting the businesses who actually need it. So one of those certifications is good. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, one more comment.
Yeah.
Thanks for giving me an inch. I'm gonna try to take a mile here. I like the 1.5 for the 1,500 for minority businesses. Commissioner Lindley, I am going to push a little bit. If this is going too far, at least I got the 1,500. Would you be willing to entertain another $1,000, which would make it a total of 2,500 for those businesses that are Black owned within our community, to be a part of this program as well? Still come out of the same 1.5 million. I don't think we exceed that number by doing this, but wondering if you would consider doing another 1,000 for those Black owned businesses in the community.
So what are you saying, as opposed to MWSBE, just specifically Black owned businesses?
Right. So 1,500 for MWSBE, and then another 1,000 for Black owned businesses, which would take the amount that a Black owned business would be able to receive in bonuses to a even 2,500, and MWBE would receive 1,500. Again, I'm putting it out there. It's your will as the maker of the motion, but I did want to ask the question.
I think the football terminology is piling on, right? Let's stick with 1,500 for now. I mean, I know it's really tempting to get into that reserve account and just use it up this afternoon, but I really prefer. And also, we are leaving. It's just $500 awards for the hardest hit and the rebounding businesses. Those are the two other categories that were eligible for bonuses. So, right? My understanding, County. So it's just.
Thank you for entertaining the thought. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Yes, absolutely. So I've got Commissioner Dozier, I've got Commissioner Minor, and then I've got Commissioner Proctor. Commissioner Dozier, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the pushing the line, Commissioner Maddox there, but I think all of these options, including programs from other sources, should be on the table next time we look at this. And I'm going to assume, forgive me, I'm going to mute for a second. I don't want to blow anyone's ears out with that. Mr. County Administrator, I'm going to assume that we're going to be tracking all of the data from the businesses that come in. How many minority and women businesses, how many hardest hit, everything like that. We're going to be able to see those numbers when we look at this again in a couple months. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And the 1,500 that's just been added, that's going to be in addition to a sliding scale for those grants, because depending on the number of employees, you may qualify for 1,500 or up to 6,000. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay. So the hardest hit businesses, I'm struggling a little bit with not increasing that category, because I think probably all of us are starting to hear businesses that are considering shutting down in the next month or two. That's why I'm getting questions, I'm sure you are, about additional PPP money. And I am really concerned about that, particularly with our hospitality industry and not being able to reopen. I mean, if we had done this better as a state, maybe we would be on a different trajectory, but I think we're going to have to look at that category next time we come back. Excuse me, Mr. Chair. So with that, Ms. County Administrator, you said something earlier. This is kind of when I raised my hands and we got away from this, but I think we've circled back to it. I think it's important to note that the PPP funding is still available. There might be more, but as we see the reports come out, whether it's locally, statewide, or nationwide, minority and women businesses, particularly minority businesses, have not gotten access to those dollars. I think our community, we did really well really early in helping incentivize applying for PPP when people applied for these grants. So it didn't occur to me before, but are we going to be, we're not requiring a company to apply for PPP through this new CARES grant program, but can we still encourage them to apply for any of these other types of programs, including PPP, and connect them with one of the chambers to help facilitate that, or our staff? I think this is another opportunity to help businesses, and particularly minority businesses, navigate that process.
And yes, we will continue to do that through this program. We're doing an awful lot of that now. We'll continue to do so. But you're right, this program, it's not a requirement that you have sought PPP funding. So to answer your question.
And lastly, people can apply for PPP without applying for any state bridge loans. That was just a stopgap measure back in the very beginning of this, right? They can go directly to the feds?
That's correct. Okay.
This is something we may have talked about 2 months ago, but I've heard stories from Hurricane Michael where businesses applied for the bridge loan from the state, but then they didn't get an equal amount from the federal government. So the federal government was forgivable, and they were on the hook for a big payment from the state when they were still suffering. So, or maybe they weren't approved from federal government and they were on that bridge loan. I've been concerned about that. So I think we're in the right posture now, just focused on the forgivable PPP loans from the federal government. Thank you.
All right, I've got Commissioner Lindley. Did you want to weigh in on point, or do you want to be in the queue?
I don't know. I guess it's kind of on point in response to Commissioner Maddox's. I was trying to help him out a little bit with an idea.
Okay, well, if it's germane, as we were told, you're in. Go for it.
It's germane. Okay. Well, what I was thinking was just the general small business assistance loans. We've got them at the 1 to 10 employees, $1,500, 11 to 24, $2,500, and then the larger ones, $5,000. I wondered if it might, because we know a lot of the minority businesses are smaller, if we might bump that 1 to 10 employees up to $2,000 and 11 to 24 up to $3,000. I think that would be a little bit more meaningful for small businesses, which I think will embrace a lot of the minority owned businesses. That's under the kind of general. What do you think?
Hey, listen, I'll take what you give me. If that's where you're going to go, it's your motion. I'll let you like it. I love it.
Well, I mean,
we already got the 1,500 in there. And you're right, a large majority of the minority businesses are in town. Black-owned businesses will be in that 24 and under range. So yes, I'll accept that. I'll accept it. I would like for you to accept that.
You just need to like it. Just like me on, yeah. So that would be $2,000 for the 1 to 10 employees and $3,000 for the 11 to 24, and then leaving the others as they were.
Okay, Commissioner Dozier, are you okay with Commissioner Lindley amending her own motion?
Yes, I am certainly okay with that. I think, you're just saying bring the floor up from 1,500 to 2,000.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm okay with that. In the ratification item later, Mr. County Administrator or Mr. Chair, could we just see a one-pager on kind of where the numbers are shifting? I'm assuming you can do that. I think that would be good, just so we have the numbers clean and, taking notes and everything as always, but that would be helpful. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay,
on point.
Yeah, go ahead, Commissioner
Germaine, Mr. Chair, to Commissioner Dozier's comments. Mr. Administrator, in that same one-pager, because I think the desire here is not for us to exceed the 1.5. If it gets to a place that you see us exceeding the 1.5, if you could make some kind of recommendation as to what those amounts could be of increase to those lower levels in order for us to meet the 1.5 and not exceed. Because right now you got direction to increase by 1,000 on each level. But again, if it exceeds, then how do you make a decision on what you're going to do? So if you could just help us out with kind of, or will it even matter as much, Mr. Administrator?
Yeah, no, we got it. I think we got what we need.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, I've got Commissioner Minor followed by Commissioner Proctor.
Thank you, Mr.
Commissioner
Chair. This has been a long discussion, but this agenda item is really comprehensive, so it's important. Coming back to the local human services assistance portion, the $2 million. As it currently stands, the maximum allowed per awardee is $20,000. But just in talking with some folks during the meeting, we've got a couple of organizations, just as examples, that are likely to see some pretty large increases in the coming weeks. Legal services, for example, the eviction moratoriums are going to be ending in Florida on July 31st. And the federal assistance to $600 a week that people are getting, that will also projected to end on July 31st. So what I think that means is that legal services is going to see an onslaught of legal requests for people that are unable to pay rent or pay mortgages. That's one example of an increased cost beyond, I think, a $20,000 threshold. Another one is CarePoint. They've got with the heavy influx of patients coming in, they've got increased demand on technology needs and staff PPE that they need because the telehealth care is just not, I mean, they're still doing a lot of face-to-face healthcare service delivery. So those are two examples of organizations that could benefit from a higher threshold than $20,000. What I'd like to do, and Commissioner Lindley, you're like the center of attention during this agenda item, but
She's the belle of the ball, maker of the motion.
I'd like to suggest, if you would, raising that threshold up to $50,000. I think that you probably only have a handful of organizations that might need that $50,000, but they would apply for that, and then they would still have to be going through the same rigorous review that any applicant would. And then they would still need to obviously comply with the eligibility requirements. They would still be reviewed by Ernst & Young. And then finally, in October, they would be reviewed by us, the County Commission, reviewing the disbursements that came out. So I think there's enough control here for that type of threshold. And I think there are probably 3 or 4 organizations in the coming weeks that could really benefit from a higher threshold. Would you consider that?
How about the county administrator might want to weigh in, give us a little bit of direction?
Sure. The only thing I would add, and this is just for commissioners for your consideration, we participated in extensive conversations with the agencies on establishing this amount, specifically legal services. We talked to, I think we included much of what Commissioner Minor said in the agenda item itself, and legal services was very fine with $20,000, and at CarePoint, as other agencies, I might point out in the analysis that we took into consideration that they've received substantial CARES Act dollars of their own to this point. So I just wanted to for additional information. That's all.
Okay, Commissioner Lindley, it's in your hands.
Well, knowing that, then I would say let's not change it at this time. I mean, we may find ourselves back at the same table next month even. We don't know. So I'd say let's not, I mean, given what the county administrator has said about contacting those large agencies. So
all right, Commissioner Minor, back in your hands. And I don't mean to insert the administrator, but I thought it was appropriate.
No, I'm glad to know that too. I didn't realize if they had made a special request, or if it's, I mean, you may be right that they may need that on down the road or already.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I've had some brief exchanges just in the last 30 minutes, an hour, but it sounds like if the county administrator has had some more extensive conversations, then I'll defer to that. Knowing that if it comes to October and we see a big influx of demand, that's even more than we anticipate here. We'll need to address that. So
okay,
but thank you, Commissioner Lindley, for your consideration. That's fine.
Oh, no, thank you. Thanks.
Okay, next up, Commissioner Proctor. You're on mute. There you go. All right, Commissioner Proctor, you're still on mute from my standpoint. Is he in his office? Huh? All right, Commissioner Proctor, we got IT coming to your rescue, I think.
I'll go get them too.
It's a three alarm. I'm gonna have to take a break too. We don't get this thing wiped out.
Mr. Chair, got a potty?
Umberto's in the house.
All right, Norberto. All right, Commissioner Proctor, you're on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'm feeling a little bit sideways and twisted now. And I think that Commissioner Dozier said it best, that the national distribution of monies out of various pots of money, that minority businesses have not gotten access to these dollars. And I think Commissioner Dozier is correct. And I think the USA Today did a story on Ben's Chili Bowl in Washington, D.C. And Ben's Chili Bowl is a historic African-American business there on U Street in Washington. And they did not qualify and did not get monies. And they were talking about the number of businesses that were Black that did not qualify for whatever reason. But the process that we're engaged in today, $51 million, and I don't understand what ought to be a shared conversation, that I feel that we are being reduced. And I remember when one of the compelling movies of my youth was seeing Oliver Twist say, "Please, sir, more, sir." And as we go through Commissioner Lindley to keep asking her permission to tolerate our desire, this straight pisses me off. This is $51 million that have come into this community, and Commissioner Minor is asking Lindley, can she, would she? Commissioner Maddox is asking. I don't like the framework of a conversation that gets this county commission having to go through the make of the motion and the seconder for permission for our thoughts to be considered. Now, I recognize that Robert's Rules of Order, okay, but this is a very small funnel that allows for the maker and the rest of us to be the beggars to the maker. There's something wrong and dysfunctional about this process.
Commissioner Proctor, you can make a substitute motion if you'd like.
My substitute motion is that the $1.5 million that Commissioner Maddox has been talking about be added, and instead of $6 million, that we go to 7.5. Why do I do that?
That's already been done. That was done.
That is already done. That's captured.
Yes.
And what is the maximum of that amount? Was that 2,000?
I think we added an additional 1,000 to the minority businesses. Am I right?
$1,500.
Yep.
Well, I want to do, and that goes to what? What amount is that? $1,500?
$1,500 on top of a grant which range from $1,500 to $6,000. If you also are hardest hit or rebounding, that would be another $1,000 to bring it to additional $2,500 per applicant on top of whatever else they might receive.
All right. So in the category of individual assistance, that can go up to 3,000, Mr. Administrator. All right. No, for individual assistance. And then we have a business category that limits to 2,500. And I'm not poo-pooing $2,500, but I want to take Commissioner Dozier's math, and using her math.
No, it would be $8,500 total possible for small business assistance when you consider their base funding. What we were just speaking to was the add-ons, When you consider the base funding of 1,500 to 6,000, and you add on the add-ons, 1,500 for WSBE, 500 for hardest hit, and 500 for rebounding, that's a maximum of a potential $8,500.
That happened real fast in real time, and I didn't keep up. But that's okay, you did. But what I'm suggesting still in this so-called process, I don't like the fact that there are great ideas being expressed, but we got to kiss Commissioner Lindley's ring for her permission to allow this and that. Now, I'm appreciative of commissioners. I remember a 4-day budget process and a 4.5 because Friday was kept just in case we had to tie something up. So this is a long way from that miserable, grueling, all day long 4-day process. But we've never been reduced to having to ask one person for permission for us to talk and buy some money. So Commissioner Lindley sitting there all smirked up, rejecting good ideas is wrong. So,
Commissioner, you can make a substitute motion. We've talked about that.
One, and you already said, I'm just saying we're in a process that we should not be reduced to peasants like Oliver Twist begging one commissioner, can we be accommodated? That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. I've got Commissioner Dozier up next. I believe. Commissioner Dozier, you're on.
Mr. Chair, I was going to comment on something else, but I'm just astonished. I mean, I think we're managing a difficult virtual meeting process pretty well, and I don't remember any time that we haven't used the process of motion and second, particularly on or a substitute motion. I am offended by some of the comments that have been made towards Commissioner Lindley right now. This is typical. It is wrong to leave the impression with the public that this is different than our normal process. Now, you want to get me started on how it is different than our normal process. I can do that. We can talk about comments, other things. We've had those debates. I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. I know. I'm not going there. We've had these debates in the past, but just to say that we can't get something done because we got this process, I think that's really disappointing and disruptive right now. I
don't care what you think, Commissioner. Those are my thoughts.
I know you
You're
don't.
out of
You
order.
can think what you want, but don't sit here and demonize what I think.
Commissioner Proctor, you're out of order. Commissioner Dozier, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I thought I was actually defending our whole board in the process here and trying not to devolve into personal attacks.
Mr. Chair, that's what I'm trying to do. The whole board don't get to do nothing. The whole board got to go through Lindley. That's not
Commissioner
fair.
Proctor.
That is not fair.
All right. Commissioner Dozier, it's yours.
Mr. Chair, we have done an incredible amount of work since 9 a.m. We've got a commission meeting starting at 3, which is going to take us a while. So thank you for managing the meeting. And I appreciate the conversation that we've had for the last few hours. Okay, back to why I rang in. The question about the nonprofits, the Commissioner Minor brought up. I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, do I need to pause?
No. Go ahead. I'm listening. I'm sorry.
That's okay. No, I heard something. Yeah. So the higher threshold, Commissioner Minor, I mean, I'm not sure what's going to happen with the mortgages, with the foreclosure rather, and evictions and all those types of things. I absolutely think that's something we need to keep an eye on. And Legal Services of North Florida, for example, has been a great partner. We've got them in the discretionary funding levels, level with last year, even though I know they're squeezed this year. So I would just suggest that, and I'm sure Ms. County Administrator, you were planning on doing this anyhow, but should bringing us back information on those pieces. But if we don't see an extension on the eviction or foreclosure rules, that may be a trigger to come back and meet again in August. We don't want to fall off a cliff. And going back to the first budget item, Mr. Chair, talking about the good, the few good years we had between the Great Recession and where we find ourselves now, it helped bring up property values. It helped spur business and everything else. We all know this, but one of the biggest problems were people not being able to afford their houses at that time. And the compounding impact on our economy and individuals' lives and families is extreme. So this piece, I just wanted to pause on Commissioner Minor's comment on that. I would be all for a special meeting in August if those deadlines are not extended and we need to do extra effort to help keep people in their homes locally, or at least reflect on the state program and see if people are asking or accessing those dollars.
Yeah, Commissioner Dozier, I know we got a budget meeting tentatively in late August. We could probably use that as a placeholder in the event that we felt like it was necessary. So good comment though, yeah.
That's what I was thinking, Mr. Chair. That's still tentative, right, as you said, but
right.
We're looking at a number of different triggers in case we need that meeting, and I would think this would be a big one. And I saw Commissioner Minor's thumbs up, so thank you for that. Yep. The other thing that I was wondering about, and Mr. County Administrator, you and I talked about this in briefing a little bit, the cost for PPE, and particularly, say, $100 thermometer, and for those businesses in hospitality who may need multiple thermometers, those costs start to increase. And I know we have distributed, and I am proud of county and our emergency operation distributing close to 1 million face masks and other items of PPE. Could you tell us, is there any type of bulk purchasing for other types of PPE like thermometers that could help offset the cost, particularly for our agency, or not exclusively for our agencies, but agencies and businesses? And I'll close this question with, I had a great conversation with Elizabeth Emanuel, Downtown Improvement Authority, and this was one of the things that she really talked about as an added cost for restaurants and others who are trying to reopen or when they do. So I'm just wondering if there's some economy of scale, if we have it, or if we could have it in bulk purchasing.
Yes, Commissioner Dozier, we have through OEV a list that we make available to all businesses where we can source our PPE where they can have the benefit of our pricing.
Okay. So I've looked at that list. There's a lot of masks particularly, and it's been evolving. For something like thermometers, and forgive me, I haven't looked at it recently, but we also list thermometers and bulk purchases. That seems to be the most costly.
Yeah, I'd have to
supplies.
Yeah, I'd have to double check on that, but we'll make sure that we follow up on that.
Okay. I don't need to change anything what we're doing right now, but if the cost of PPE is something that we need to look at in the future, and if there's ways to mitigate that, I would love for us to have that on the agenda also, August or whenever. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Right.
That's all.
I'm going to make a few comments and wind this down. Nick, great comments early on about your microloan that then was picked up by Commissioner Lindley, which was carried through. And I think in the end, although we didn't get to where maybe you wanted to, I think some of the changes that we effected make a difference. And I appreciate everybody patience with that. I think we've come a long way. $50 million if 6 months ago you guys had said we'd be having these conversations right now about pandemics and thermometers and masks. Gone are the days of the good old easy hurricanes. So anyway, we will be meeting again. So we have a motion on the floor. All in favor of the motion as presented by Commissioner Lindley, seconded by Commissioner Dozier, signify by saying aye. Aye. Okay, Commissioner Proctor, you with us on this one? Okay, and I've got Commissioner Jackson is still on the line. I understand he's also, you good with that, Commissioner Jackson? I'm going to assume so. Yeah, okay. So we have unanimous consent or unanimous approval. We will be back at this same bat channel at 3 p. Oh, go ahead, Commissioner Dozier.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah. Commissioner
Before you
Dozier,
run-
then Commissioner Maddox. Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. I think she's telling me go ahead.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Commissioner Dozier.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I was giving it to Commissioner Maddox. There was a lot going on there. Mr. Chair, I mean, I actually, and I apologize for this. I was trying to raise my hand in the first item, and I wasn't able to before we took the vote. So I could ask a couple of these questions in the commission meeting. We've been here a long time. So when we get to the ratification item, I don't mind bringing up a few of these questions that I had. It could go pretty quick. I'm getting a lot of feedback. I'm not sure if you all are, but okay, thank you. I just wanted to kind of put you on notice there. We can do it now, we can do it later, but would you prefer to do it later?
Yeah, I think later would probably be my preference, yeah.
Okay. Well, then let's just put a placeholder for a few more questions at that time. Thanks.
Perfect. Commissioner Maddox, and you wanted to make a motion, didn't you, Commissioner Maddox?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I
did.
apologize.
No,
Just
it's okay.
remember.
I get it. It was a long time when I made that comment. The motion here is for agenda item for staff to bring back for us to look at a microloan program specifically for Black-owned businesses. Also within that agenda item, Mr. Chair, if staff can bring back different options for us being able to fund such a program, and the different ways we can go about executing that program. That would be my motion, Mr. Chair.
I would second that, and I would ask that OEV be potentially somehow looped into that as well, if that's okay, Commissioner Maddox.
Definitely. Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Minor, you had your hand up. Was that a second, or do you want to?
That was just a second, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Dozier?
I told Commissioner Maddox I'd second this, but y'all jumped in quick. So
you guys are slow. I get everything a little, so I figured I'd second it. It's a good motion.
No, it's good. I'm glad.
Okay.
Commissioner Maddox, 100%. I support the motion. I'm just going to reiterate that Black-owned businesses have the least access to capital of anyone. We need to focus on that. I would still like to see how microloan programs or other type of loan programs work for women-owned businesses, for other minority-owned businesses, for everyone. I think we need to start where you are, but I hope that we will look at this as a support for any business that might not be able to get access to capital in the future. There's a lot of women-owned businesses that can't do that either, and particularly Black women-owned businesses might be the hardest hit. So I'm all for the motion. I just, when we get into the OEV and the long-term conversation, I hope we can expand on that a little bit.
Yes, I'm willing to do that once we get to that conversation.
Thank
Okay,
you, sir.
we have Commissioner Proctor, and let's bring it in for landing. Commissioner Proctor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I wanted to give a shout out, give high compliments to our staff for how well that they have parceled out the hard and arduous task of spending $51 million. And given the number of light years which I've observed this process, we've had some other challenges, but we ain't never had the challenge of spending $51 million in half of a year, and to come up with creative ideas on how to balance our support for the needs of our community. So a shout out, salute to outstanding. And this is why my confidence is always resolute no matter the moment, because whether we're running short or whether we are surplus and running long, our staff always comes through. So Vince, I want to thank you, and want to thank you guys for what you've done, for Chastity, for you making sure that we're tight and right within the guidelines, and that Leon County is going to soar, and we're going to have the model program in the southeastern United States in this regard. So, commissioners, we commission, and we love each other when we ain't commissioning, and we love each other while we're commissioning. And I thank you all for your long suffering of a commissioner named Proctor. And Mr. Chairman, you did a fine job. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Maddox, and let's
Thank
wind
you,
it up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think this will probably be understood, but I want to make sure I put it as a part of the motion. Hopefully my seconder still stays with me. I want to include Big Bend Minority Chamber and the Capital City Chamber within the conversation of creating that proposal. So if they can also be at the table along with OEB on working on putting together a proposal within that microloan program, as well as be at the once we propose the actual item, that they be at that meeting as well. Would the seconder be okay with me adding that to the motion? Mr. Chair, for some reason I can't hear you, Mr. Chair. Okay, that's a yes. I'll take that as a yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and bring it in for a landing unless somebody else has something to talk about with this motion in particular. Okay, all in favor of Commissioner Maddox's motion? Commissioner Dozier, did you want to weigh back in? I'm sorry, you look like you were.
I just wanted clarification.
Sure.
Commissioner Maddox, I mean, I think working with Big Bend Minority and Capital City is great. We're still coming back in with options for different types of loan programs and everything like that. We're just working with them to talk through the issues,
Right,
and get ideas on the table. That's what you wanted?
Yeah,
okay. I just wanted to make sure again, the sound was a little bit off for a second, so I just wanted to make sure I heard you. Thank you.
Okay, we have a motion, we have a second. All in favor of the motion as presented signify by saying aye. Aye. Looks to me like it's unanimous. Okay, we are adjourned and we'll be back at 3 o'clock, same place, same time. Thank you very much. Good meeting. Appreciate it. Yeah, we're going to leave this on, and a shout out to IT before I forget too. You guys have rocked it, so thank you.